Has a new humanoid species been discovered in the mountains near Nazca, Peru?
We are living in a very exciting moment. This is pure history in the making.
Have scientists working around the world proven that the Nazca mummies are genuine?
The results strongly support that these beings are not closely related to any known organism on Earth.
Is there a concerted effort to discredit and deny the evidence?
The Ministry of Culture, until last Friday, was interested in participating, but for unknown reasons, they've backed down.
If it was really an ET mummy, they should be able to show CAT scans and x-rays of the individual.
They have done x-rays on them. Is that something the Ministry of Culture would be interested in?
Never before seen footage of the location where the bodies were found.
It's clear that this was some hidden place. Maybe there are more subjects.
New high-resolution CAT scans that contain startling revelations.
Inside, he was able to detect the fetus of some creature. It is clear by scientists that it's something different. It is not human.
Unearthing Nazca. In 2016, a rare find was discovered in the Palpa region, south of Peru, very close to the mythical region of Nazca. A huaquero, or tomb raider, found a group of mummified bodies with surprising physical characteristics, hands with 3 fingers and elongated heads. According to his account, he found them in a secret tomb, of which only he knew the location. The subsequent testing on these bodies revealed extraordinary facts, such as their ancientness and the fact that it was a biological organism. At the same time, the tests opened more questions of what these mummified beings could be. The country's government officials and archaeologists were very adamant about not being involved, yet they let the testing continue privately. What did this huaquero really find that day in 2016? And why have the local authorities not taken part in the research of what could be an unparalleled discovery in Peru? Is this a well-orchestrated fraud by a tomb raider? Or are we facing a blatant attempt to discredit such an astonishing finding? For everyone involved in this case, they felt that they had interesting information. But at every turn, there was a block in completing the investigation, whether it was from the government, Mario, or several members of the team. But then, something interesting happened. On August 18th, 2018, the team, including Konstantin and Dmitry, were able to get access to the bodies to do one final tomography that was of the highest quality. These CT tomographies used a special program that allowed a more detailed examination of each layer of the bodies in a precise way that would be able to isolate certain areas for better examination.
After we received these high-resolution images, Professor Galitsky was able to make very detailed analysis of both Maria, big one, and very important, Josefina, little creature. If we talk about Maria, she's human-like. First of all, details of her skull, anatomy of the skull. Second, of course, fingers and toes. So, if we go step by step, then of course, first the skull. On the skull, we see that she has no ears, and construction of her ear bones different from us. This is the first main conclusion. Then construction of skull itself, it's a little bit different. Of course, it is elongated skull, maybe not as elongated as we can see in Paracas, but still it is elongated. It is more elongated compared with our rounded skull. Second, different construction of bones of nose. But all other topics of the skull are very similar. We don't have a lower part of the body. So neither organs of reproduction, nor liver, no kidneys. It's strange, but this came to some conclusions that maybe she was attacked by some animal. And Professor Galitsky was able to find tracks of claws, fangs on her body. And all this lower part of the body is just as taken away. And then we see some parts of particle that may be related to blood. The most interesting for all of us was analysis of small bodies. And we had CT scans of 2 bodies. And now we know that those are male and female. And we had a high-resolution analysis of one of them. Their anatomy construction is totally different from ourselves. No human beings, no animals have type of bones as they have. All living creatures have joints. For little creatures, it's not so. It's some very strange construction, like some balls of tissues inside. This allowed them to have some movements, but not like ourselves. So they were unable to make it like this, but only like this. And same as like this. So it's clear that their movement was quite limited. Then construction of their ribs is again totally different from any living creatures. Because for all living creatures, we have this central ball. Their ribs are rounded, and they have no this internal part. Absolutely different construction of skull. And, of course, fingers and toes. They don't have mouths as we do. So it's clear that they were unable to eat hard food. Then, totally different construction of ears. They had ears, but no like ears like we do, just holes. And different type of bones inside the ear. There are some bones, it is clearly seen, but different. Then they had some holes on their skull that no living creatures have. And of course, it's absolutely unclear why do they have this type of holes. So what was the reason for nature to have this hole? And of course, detailed analysis in tomography allowed to see that it's not construction, that it's one subject. Because when they make analysis on tomography, they can make it slide by slide and see tiny details on high resolution. So it's clear that it's not composed of different parts, it's one and the same subject. From the very beginning, from the first X-ray, we've seen some rounded subjects in the belly of Josephina. But when we had this detailed CT scan, Professor Galitsky was able to make like a slides on the image of those eggs. And he demonstrated that those are real eggs because they have some cover, like any egg. They have some inside content. And inside, he was able to detect the fetus of some creature. So from one side, it is Josephina fetus. From other side, it is fetus of some living creature.
With all this evidence and detail, could there be something in this that suggests, at the very least, a new species on this planet? Finally, on the morning of November 19th, 2018, Cusco Congressman Armando Villanueva Mercado presided over a hearing about the mummies. Scientists whom had participated in the study of the Peruvian mummies from different countries were invited. Every scientist had 15 minutes to present their data. Several groups presented tomography analysis, describing their anatomical structure. 3 groups presented results of DNA studies of different samples. All of these groups worked independently. With respect to the tomography analysis, The results were presented by Mexican Navy pathologist Dr. Jose Jesus Salsa Benitez and biologist Jose de los Rios Lopez, also from Mexico, and from Peru, radiologist Dr. Raimundo Salas Alfaro and surgeon Dr. Edson Salazar Vivanco. Dr. Galicki presented the results of Russian studies, focusing on the analysis of the characteristics of the body structure not noted by other researchers. In general, all came to the conclusion that the anatomical structure of all mummies is different from humans. Mummies are so complex that any possibility of counterfeiting is eliminated. Biologist Ricardo Rengel of the Mexican company Abraxas Biosystems presented the results of the DNA analysis of the small mummy, Victoria. Sen4Gen Labs from Canada performed a sample processing and sequencing. The fact that it was possible to extract DNA clearly indicated that the sample was from biological tissue. The same conclusion was made in the Russian laboratory of V.S. Baronov. The Canadian laboratory had a greater amount of material, so that they were able to do better sequencing. The computerized analysis of the data showed that this DNA does not coincide with any human being or living organisms. Comparisons were facilitated with microorganisms, bacteria, and animals such as primates, crocodiles, and turtles. The conclusion was that the specimens were an unknown species of living beings. Therefore, the data from genetic studies, the tomography analysis, and the elementary composition of bodies clearly demonstrated that the mummies were genuine and required more serious research. All the groups worked independently, using their own resources and finances. The main objective of these presentations was to attract the attention of the Peruvian scientific community and to transfer the investigation to the official level. After the scientific presentations, a Peruvian archaeologist was given the floor. He stated that all the data presented was absolutely unacceptable. No one knows where these mummies were found and how they were extracted. No archaeologist was involved. There was no official authorization. And it is unclear on what basis all the studies presented were made. Who authorized it? And where were the samples obtained? He didn't even want to consider the results, or that his own organization wanted nothing to do with the find from the beginning. Other official representatives of Peruvian science were not so blatantly negative. The Peruvian archaeologists' speeches were more neutral, but none of them supported the continuation of the investigation at any level.
The Ministry of Culture, until last Friday, was interested in participating. I went there personally to talk to the Ministry of Culture myself, but for unknown reasons, they've backed down from participating.
After all the findings were presented, the Peruvian government went dark. There was no verdict by the government. Was the evidence too convincing? Was there not enough? But then, something unexpected happened. Despite all the backlash from the anthropologists and archaeologists, a university took interest in the bodies. About 190 miles south of Lima, in the Nazca region, sits the Universidad San Luis Gonzaga in the town of Ica. This university is well known for scientific and technological studies that will help forward the world in changing times, specifically in the country of Peru. Is it possible that from the research gathered thus far, that the university saw potential to dive deeper? The research facility has all the bodies but Josefina, which is being held back by Mario. Mario believes it has great value and refuses to give it to the university. And so, the investigation continues, but in their hands. It seems that the evidence offered by scientists around the world and the persistence of the crew sparked an interest with some of the academic communities in Peru that could not be denied. Perhaps it is the discovery of a new species, a parting of waters in the knowledge of what we have of the human race. Or maybe, is it something completely different? The only people that have tried to find answers are a group of people committed first and foremost to finding what might be the truth. The journey started with a quest to give the truth to the authorities, and it ended with the bodies being transferred into a safe and reliable research facility for a deeper investigation. As the university unravels the truth using high-tech equipment and more DNA studies, the world waits for an official answer.
Great view of the eye socket. Very different eye socket. And that's another thing that the scientists who've looked at this at Stanford have commented on. If you look at this creature and you look at the cranial vault, how large it is, the size from the eyes up is at least 3 times that of a human.
One of the first things that Dr. Lockman immediately remarked upon was the shape of the head and the skull. It was not something that he is accustomed to seeing, and it was quite interesting and in some ways exciting that the associated features that you would expect from a syndrome of that nature were not found. This specimen does not fall under any known, to me, class of disorders or syndromes. In many respects, the proportions of the spine and extremities are normal. The major abnormalities appear to be 1, the size of the specimen, mid-face hypoplasia and underdevelopment of the jaw, and that the specimen has only 10 ribs. Humans normally have 12, rarely 11. One of the most remarkable aspects of this is when we came down to study the actual bone density. One of the features of fetuses that specialists looks at is the so-called growth plates of the epiphyseal joint, say, of the knees. The shock, I think, and the surprise was, and the absolute certainty that Dr. Lockman had was that this specimen is between the age of 6 to 8 years old. The shock was that this specimen was clearly not fetal. How do you explain how something 6 inches tall survived to any length of time that would allow for it to survive 100 or 1,000 years ago?
And what amazes me is the media. Well, they're so compromised on this, they don't dare do anything but follow the company line on it. The company line being a series of lies.
This is a document talking about the current program at the CIA. And it says that the PAO, Public Affairs Office, has relationships with reporters from every underlying major wire service, newspaper, news weekly, and television network in the nation. In many instances, we have persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories that could have adversely affected national security. Now, what's the purpose of this? The CIA has no mandate for anything domestic. The FBI is domestic. What the hell is this?
It's got too much tissue on it. They actually want a piece of the bone from at least like a 0.5 of a millimeter in.
Como medio milímetro de...
We took material from inside the cranium, also 2 clippings of the anterior front ribs of this being. And we were able to see under the dissecting microscope that in fact it did have bone marrow in them, so that meant there should be some good genetic material in there.
It was really nerve-wracking. Imagine, 2 big guys here trying to operate on this 13-centimeter long beam. But we did it.
The DNA analysis is being done by some of the world's best, but even the world's best need to be cross-checked, which is why I'm doing the 3 different facilities. So I actually ran 4 samples. I ran a sample of my own blood. It was a very small amount, just 100 microliters. I ran 2 blanks, things that just had water in them, because that would be essentially a contamination control. And then, of course, the sample itself. And really the all-important first result was whether or not there was in fact any DNA which was isolated. And the actual shock for me was when I got the amount of DNA out of this sample. It was way above what I had originally expected. What you have on the left here is a so-called DNA ladder. This is a size standard. This one on the end is in fact my DNA, and it has an expected size distribution as well as some banding. And validating the original measurement is this analysis that basically shows that we have a nice distribution for the sample's DNA.
The first half, dealing with the Atacama skeleton, is an interesting phenomenon because it turns out there's not just one of these, but there are at least 2. And I just got a report from Chile last night that multiple of these small creatures have been seen live and living in these foothills of the Andes in the Atacama region. The Atacama skeleton was found in this area of Chile. It is about 6 inches. I found it saw it, I should say, in 2009. I didn't discover it, nor did I take it out of Chile, regardless of what the New York Times has been alleging. In reality, a treasure hunter found it in an old ruins of an Indian village in the foothills of the Atacama region in this area of Chile. Now, this is an area that the native peoples had reported seeing small people, which they call the Gentiles. It's an interesting term they use for them. For centuries and perhaps millennia. And it had also been associated with seeing UFOs. It was actually taken in the area right over where this Atacama skeleton was found. And there are very unusual objects that are seen going in and out of the Andes that are luminous, partially materialized objects, sometimes fully materialized. And the report I received last night from a researcher who I have credit this photograph and a lot of this information to, Alex Chianetti, thank you, is that there are reports of these being seen recently by people in that area as living organisms. And the one that I want to show you next, this is the one that is in the possession of a man in Barcelona. And he was a man who went to Chile, met the treasure hunter who had been sifting through these old ruins from the late 1800s, early 1900s in mining towns, looking for treasures, basically, old artifacts. And in a pouch, in one of them, someone had preserved and saved this. Now, I first learned of this in 2009. It was found in 2003. And the public knew some of the information on it beginning in 2004 and 5. Some studies were done in Europe showing that it was in fact not human. The anthropologists had found that there was wear on some of the connective tissue still remaining on the feet, that it had walked around, et cetera, and so on. However, no thorough genetic testing had been done, because to do the genetic testing requires damaging this very unusual skeleton. I was invited first just to view it. And when I first saw it, I put it in my hand, and I have big hands. Size 9 surgical gloves. Anyway, and it was 6 inches. It did not take up my whole hand. And I looked at this, and I knew immediately that this was not a model or a fake or what have you. I knew that this was an actual, had been a living organism. And so we examined it, looked at it, photographed it, made a connection with Ramon in Barcelona who owned it, and we kept the dialogue going. In 2012, I was able to convince him to allow us to come over with a technical and sort of surgical team and take samples of the bone and be able to get bone marrow that could then be extracted and run through some genetic tests to see if it matches or didn't match to any known species on Earth. Now, during that time, we got a bunch of x-rays and CAT scans, and you'll see that it has a very different appearance to a fetus or a newborn baby. And if you look carefully at this, you'll also see that on a newborn and a fetus, the bones are very, very thin. They're rubbery. This is the knee on the Atacama humanoid. We'll get into this. And what you'll also find is that the skull has 4 bones, and we have 6. The Atacama has 10, we have 12, etc. It's grossly, obviously different from a human. Now, the question was, then what is it? For the record, I have never stated it is of extraterrestrial origin. We do not know what this is. But the hatchet job done at Stanford and UCSF and Genome Research Magazine, which is atrocious on this study, is going to get exposed very quickly. And this is me holding up the skeleton. And when you see it, look at the extent of the calcification and how opaque it is. The amount of calcium in those bones is consistent with a small child. Because when you're in utero, there is not much calcium in those bones. They're very cartilaginous, meaning like cartilage. This is why newborn babies, I'm a trauma doctor, when there's a terrible accident, they're amazing. They're like Gumby bears. They can move and do this, and they don't have a broken bone. Why? Because they don't have a high degree of calcification, which you have as you get older. And there are a lot of technical reasons for this, having to do with osteoblasts and things that will put the general audience to sleep. I will not go into. But it's important to note that. And the very first thing, the radiologist in Barcelona, when we pulled this off the x-ray machine and out of the CAT scanner, they all went, oh, my God, this is not a fetus. They had assumed this little thing had to be an ejected or aborted fetus, 22 weeks, 28 weeks. They said, this was a child, and it was up running around. It had epiphyseal plates. What are epiphyseal plates? Epiphyseal plates are in where the long bones, and you will see that there's a place, what's called a growth plate. And you know when you're growing, the bones have to grow because there's a growth plate in the long bones that allows them to continue to grow and lay down new bone and get longer and longer as we get taller and taller as we reach our full mature height. Those epiphyseal plates are consistent with a 6 to 8 year old human child in terms of developmental stage. There is another one. Look at the skull and look at the overlapping helmet-like feature. If you look at the skull sutures and the way a large skull bone comes over to like a point and overlaps, it's identical to the Atacama skeleton. This is from Russia from 1996. A separate small being that was found running around that a woman captured, unfortunately kept it in captivity, tried to feed it yogurt. It died and was subsequently autopsied. I understand that it was later confiscated by some authorities after initial tests had been done. It's bigger. This is an adult. The skull is the same essentially as the Atacama. Now, what's important about that is that if there are 2 of these, it rules out a singular genetic mutation of a human embryo. There's no way. It isn't going to happen. It'd be 1 in a quadrillion chances. Interestingly, it was the assistant of Dr. Gary Nolan at Stanford who had offered to do an honest examination of this genetically, who found this Russian being, and then I had another researcher send it to me. And I recalled that in 1996, when I was over in England, I was told about this, but by the time I wanted to go over to Russia to get it, it had been seized and it had vanished. We do not know where it is now. I hear different stories of where it is. One account is that it was buried on the shore of the Black Sea, another is that it's in the KGB's or FSB's hands. We do not know. It's not available for examination, which means all we have are these images. Now, this means that with two of them, we really have a phenomenon of something that is a creature, that is a humanoid or human-like creature, not described in the medical literature, not described in the scientific literature anywhere. And so this became even more of a mystery. I will let you just peruse this. This is from Dr. Ralph Lockman. Now he is sort of the world's expert on skeletal abnormalities in children, and actually literally wrote the textbook. And he reviewed all the x-rays and all the CAT scans, and he came to the conclusion it was a 6 to 8 year old child, that the chances that it was progeria, which is a type of genetic condition where you age your bones rapidly and could be, younger than that, is extremely small. And he had never seen anything like this. And this from the man at both UCLA and Stanford, who is the professor who is the world's expert on skeletal dysplasias, abnormalities in the skeleton in children. And it matched no genetic syndrome. So by this point, and this was in the fall of 2012, we knew we had something significant. I went and got the bone marrow in September, late September 2012. The DNA was handed off, along with these images, to Stanford and to Dr. Nolan in October of 2012. And then it seems everything fell apart. Now, you can read these for yourself, where he's basically saying that the chances this is a spontaneous chance mutation are infinitesimally small. And we had discussions where he said, essentially, we don't know what this is, but the chances it could be a mutation from just a singular event in a human embryo are infinitesimal. And we began to look forward to these genetic workups. And this is an extensive area of esoteric science. We're not going to go into the arcane nature of it. This was worrisome. 1 month later, a $3.2 million grant award, the Teal Award, was granted to Nolan and his lab from the Department of Defense. I have an assistant supporter who found this. I did not know that until a few weeks ago. I thought, well, it's not proof of anything. It's worrisome because by the time he began to start running the genetic tests and workups, it seems that he had been told by someone to say it was a deformed human. And that's what you will read in the New York Times and on CNN and the BBC that came out in March. What was most worrisome, and I haven't talked about this until now, when Sirius premiered 5 years ago, April 24th, it made quite a stir. For almost an entire week, this was the #1 story on the Huffington Post. The major news media, The View, were all contacting me to have interviews. Dr. Nolan went out to the public and stated, don't worry, it's a deformed human. The day of the premiere and the release of the movie Sirius, which many of you helped fund. Of course, I was shocked by this betrayal since the work had not been done properly yet. All the evidence has suggested it was not, but it submarined the film. It submarined and torpedoed the entire launch of Sirius, which was part of our disclosure effort. And none of the mainstream media would cover this after that, because case closed, it's a deformed human. Levels of the intelligence community. So come March 22nd, 26th, somewhere in that period, on the online version of this journal, Genome Research, is the article that submarines the Atacama humanoid, and with it, they wished my credibility. Now, what's important about this is that Genome Research magazine, it's associated with Cold Spring Harbor, which is where Watson and Crick, discovered DNA. Unfortunately, this journal, which is supposedly peer-reviewed, did not do any proper peer review of the article. And we can prove this now. What happened is that it turns out that this genome research is sort of a lower tier scientific journal compared to Cell or Nature or some of the others. But the authors were prestigious enough that they ran it through and published it and rushed to publish it. 5 years after Nolan had already told the media it was a deformed human. And in this article, he says, well, it's alien baby syndrome. There are 7 spontaneous all-at-once mutations that happened in utero, and that it's a deformed female fetus that was aborted at around 22 weeks. Absolutely not true. He also states that it was from 40 years ago that this skeleton had been sitting in the desert. The people who actually excavated it found it in strata of remains of an archaeological site dating from the late 1800s to about 1930. He also claims that we told him that it was thousands of years old, which no one ever did. We knew it wasn't. So there was one misrepresentation after another after another. And I knew something was very wrong when I was at one of my daughter's homes, and this had broken. We had a phone call from my wife's brother, who is an academic in Boston, and says, well, see, this thing your husband was pursuing, it's just all nonsense. It's just a deformed fetus. And I'm reading the article in the New York Times. I didn't know. I was shocked. I said, what? So somehow, this cabal that Gary's gotten connected to the Stars Academy, arrange for any bit of information that comes out will be on the front pages of the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN. Meanwhile, Unacknowledged, which is the top documentary in the world that actually exposes the truth about this issue, blacklisted and isn't covered. Very strange. This is when we had proof that the intelligence community completely owns the media. And they own them lock, stock, and barrel when it comes to anything this sensitive. And so we're on our own now, friends. It's up to us, because this monstrous cabal has absolutely seen to it that the falsehoods are going to trump the truth. Now, look at the coverage all over the world. And on my WikiLeaks page, it says this is a deformed human. I can't get it changed. We tried to change it, but WikiLeaks is mobbed up too. I mean, not WikiLeaks, Wikipedia. So what you find is that there is an orchestration of a release of information mixed with disinformation coming from what the CIA official calls the rat pack that's been running scams on the public for decades. It's very worrisome. And it also means that we are going to have to do this through the alternative media. All right? And that's what we have to set upon doing. Now, this is something, if you wish to read any of this, you can. Unless you have a PhD in molecular biology or genetics or an MD, I think it will be inscrutable. But let me tell you the shock of my life. It happened a few weeks ago. not one, but multiple people contacted me from the academic world and said, that article that's in Genome Research magazine that's gotten worldwide coverage, junk science start to finish. One gentleman, who is a man who literally has a Caltech PhD in genetics, who had worked with Watson, Sanger, had done the pioneering work on X-ray crystallography of DNA, et cetera, contacted me urgently and said, Dr. Greer, this is something very wrong here. And one of the first emails he says, as a non-expert, might not have noticed it, but I'm fairly sure that Nolan and colleagues planned a fake analysis from the beginning. They included lots of random mutations in their sequences by intent, by omitting a standard treatment to remove them. What is he talking about? Well, he sent me an article that had come out over 10 years ago that was about old DNA. So there's DNA you take out of your body when it's living. There's DNA that you get from a skeleton that's been laying in the desert, like the Atacama, for decades. Totally different treatment of that. Because once it's out in the environment, not in a preserved environment, not in a cryogenic lab, there is rapid oxidation and degradation of that DNA. And everyone in genetics knows this. So you have to do controls at the very beginning that are very inexpensive and very fast to find out how many of these have been oxidized and how many base pairs have switched with each other to see what the damage to the DNA is, because otherwise you're going to call that damage a mutation, which is exactly what they did deliberately. They took damage that any body in a PhD program, never mind someone at a professor level at UCSF and Stanford, would have caught. And they called it mutations of a fetus. Now, this is not my opinion. This is the opinion of these scientists. So we have 2 separate peer reviews now. And the peer review system usually works where they put the information out, but they leave their names off of it. And frankly, both of these men want to stay out of this scandal. But their pedigree is impeccable. And when I talked to the first one who contacted me, he said, Dr. Greer, you would have to have been someone who walked off the street into that lab at Stanford not to have known this. And to have done this, he says, is a academic corruption scandal like he has never seen in his career. He's an elderly man. And I said, yeah, I know that, but I'm not a geneticist. I don't have a PhD from UCSF. I have a daughter who does in genetics, neuroscience. But I am a doctor, medical doctor, and so I understand the principle what he was explaining. And I said, well, this is a huge problem then, because we have now the worldwide media covering this Atacama skeleton, calling it a human when it isn't. Now, in and of itself, the Atacama being isn't that important. There's plenty of evidence. If you look at all the material we've collected for UFOs, extraterrestrial, then why am I even dwelling with this? Because this is a case study in how the intelligence community will try to sideline actual disclosure and have a clear field for the fake disclosure that's coming, that will be based on a false flag operation, that will be false from start to finish, will have a core of actual evidence, but surrounded by the atmospherics of a threat that's alien. We're going to get into this later. So, without going into all the details, he also explained the second person who contacted me, number 2, is a PhD geneticist who has worked in academic and government centers and then started genome sequencing companies. Now, he was right down the road from Stanford in Mountain View. This is perhaps one of the great world experts in genome sequencing. And he said he had contacted Nolan and his team to do a reference-free sequence of the entire genome of the Atacama skeleton. What does that mean? It means that without prejudice, You take the genetic material and you run the entire genome. Now this takes massive computational. We're talking about billions of base pairs in the DNA. But you do the entire mapping and you do a read that ends up with, like 90 billion reads. Very in-depth. He offered to do this for them, was turned down. When Sirius came out, said, no, we won't do it. Another geneticist contacted me and said he had offered before that to help them do a proper genetic analysis and had also been turned away. And these were people who just wanted to know the truth of what is this thing? Is it human? Is it some other primate? Is it extraterrestrial? Is it a hybrid? What the heck is it? Because no one knew what this was. And you know what? We still don't know. And that's the tragedy here. So ultimately, once this happened, and I think this is where we get into the deeper part of the intelligence community and the media cooperation and academia that we have to begin to understand and not be naive about. That what you are told in the public and what actually happens is almost never related to the truth. On any subject I've been intimate with and known the details of, none of it. So what we have to begin to understand, we're living in the Truman Show. We're sort of like going around, it's like Jim Carrey in the Truman Show, that movie. And we think we know how the world works, how the government works, how the media works, or even what science is. We don't. We've been told absolutely a myth. And it is time for us to change that once and for all. If we understand what these men are saying, and I understand that they're actually more blunt in person, where they say, this is corruption. This is scientific corruption. This was fraud at the beginning. Now, I don't know. What I'm saying is that and I have a letter in my possession here that I have just completed this week that is going to the provost of Stanford and to UCSF and to Cold Spring Harbor Genome Research. And in it, it's a 3-page letter that lays this out. And it is basically demanding that they return any genetic material to us, because we're not going to get more of it, that there be a retraction of this journal, that they reimburse us for, you crowdfunded tens of thousands of dollars to go over and do this study on this. The public did. And we have all been deceived. And this needs to be corrected. So this is also going to go to various federal agencies, because I have a mole inside UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, who I will not name, who is discovering that there apparently have been misuse of federal dollars in this endeavor. So this could end up being a massive scandal. So I'm asking for the academic corruption of this to be investigated, to see where the science went wrong, and to find out how the cherry picking of the DNA happened. What do I mean by that? Well, one of these gentlemen, the genome sequencing expert, just one example, this is one out of pages and pages of material these experts have sent me. We're diploid, right? We have 2 sets of chromosomes, our alleles are diploid. Well, there are ones that are triploid. They have 3. The Atacama, it turns out, had 360,000 triploid reads. They were all thrown out and dismissed as not important. Now this is in the data if you drill down into the attachments to this paper. Now normally if you were to take a read and you had 90 billion reads on a fresh human DNA sample, there might be 200 that just happen due to programming error or something. Yeah, out of 90 billion, you're going to have that. This is 360,000 triploid on only a small amount of DNA they studied. The other thing they did was to extrapolate on a very small amount of the DNA sequence the entire genome of this creature instead of running the entire genome. So instead of a 90 billion read through, there were 509 million. So that's a fraction, like 0.2%. And then there's this mystery. When the first initial run was done, I was contacted by Nolan, and he said, this is only matching 89 to 91% with humans, and maybe less than that by the time we do deeper reads. The head of this genome sequencing company, about the time the film series came out, when he called Nolan at Stanford, was told it was down to 70 to 80%. Now it's believed it may be a fraction of 1% matching. It is not at all what we've been told. Now, I'm not going to drill down in a public setting with all the esoteric genetic sequencing technology, but one thing that has been said by all the scientists who've looked at this is that deliberate cherry picking of the data was done. Antiquated techniques and technology was used, even though state-of-the-art was offered. And then you have Nolan hooking up with this group filled with CIA and Department of Defense people, publishes this in a little-known journal that gets worldwide media coverage on something this obscure. Why? Because as the father of the disclosure movement globally, they need to neutralize me. And if they won't do it through an assassin, they'll do it this way. So that's what this is actually about.
Where are we now? We are in a bread and circus. This is a phrase used to describe the creation of public approval, not through excellent public policy, but rather through diversion and distraction.
No, I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. You are driving me nuts. That's ridiculous.
Keep people fat, keep them happy, keep them diverted, and keep them entertained with drivel and shock and nonsense. That's, unfortunately, the sort of thing that has taken the place of news and information.
So that what we're seeing today is a world in which perception is being managed by as little as 5 major media corporations who collectively control magazines, newspapers, corporate news websites, television stations, movies, documentaries.
Who are these people? Who could be behind the curtain? Who could possibly be controlling us so effectively?
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
2 final words. The reason they don't want us to know what they're doing is because if too many of us knew what they were doing, they might not be able to get away with it. And the reason that you don't read about it is that if you get a copy of Daniel Estulon's most recent book, he was the writer of The True Story of the Bilderberger. There are several pages, chapter and verse, that show that every major news outlet in the English-speaking world is controlled by a Bilderberger. Thank you very much.
And I'm also, I showed some of this yesterday, but I want to reboot a little bit. This is what Zalitsky, her imaging, is finding off Cuba here. These are the monuments, which largely look like roads and pyramids. She claimed sphinxes, and I'm going to read directly from her interview tonight. We're going to hear her voice in her own words, which is something always remarkable. You know, there's a lot of interpretation, but it's always nice to hear the actual quote. I do feel when I look at these ruins that it's a staggering find, and it completely uproots and upends history, because if a major culture, a pyramid-making culture, and the type of advanced knowledge and tools that are involved with that culture sank to a depth of 2,200 feet in some ancient period of our past, that completely changes all of the history that we know That's why Atlantis it's one of the reasons why Atlantis is such a hot potato. Atlantis Rising is a real hot potato. That's more of the graphic imaging. We always try to find more here, but this is kind of the interpretation of the submersible unit that they sent down, because it's so far down there that at 2,200 feet, you're not going to get normal divers to do anything. And again, a lot of researchers found it interesting that Zalitsky didn't make it. You know, it's like as soon as she goes to this cave, all of those ruins open up. It's quite unusual. Maybe that's it was just kismet, you know, but certainly it made some people wonder. Okay, I have read. Now, Zalitsky, she studied engineering in the Soviet Union and oceanography and was assigned to work on a secret submarine base in Cuba during the Cold War. She eventually defected to Canada. She met her current husband, businessman Paul Zweinzig. Now, the couple own and operate a company called Advanced Digital Communications. And again, this is Paulina Zalitsky, who found the Cuban city there. So Zalitsky reports that at about 2,200 feet off Cuba's western tip, she's found a huge land plateau with clear images of what appear to be man-made, large-size architectural designs, partly covered by sand. From above, the shapes resemble pyramids, roads, and buildings, quote unquote. Okay, so here's some of the QA that she's had with Linda and AP. Is there anything that you can say on the record this morning that I can do some kind of an update? For the record, you can say that the Center for Marine Archaeology and Anthropology at the Cuban Academy of Science is currently analyzing video data that we have from the perimeter of the site from megalithic stones. They're working on inscriptions that they have detected on the stones and are analyzing them at the time. What are the estimated size of these stones? The estimated size of these stones, they are roughly about 2 by 5 meters, very large stones. That's about 6 feet by 15 or 16 feet, something like that. 6 feet on each of the 4 sides and 16 feet high. So they go into a little bit about how the stones look like Stonehenge. On these stones, where are the possible inscriptions? They are not anywhere specific on the stones, these inscriptions. They could be in the middle of the stones, various parts of the stones across. One thing we found, the anthropologist found, was an American cross. It's a Central American cross. I found the references go here to exteganography, and we'll see as we get along. Is that where 2 lines are crossed perpendicular to each other? No, they're not 2 lines. They're oval shapes crossing each other. Okay, so this goes on. There's a description there. And they talk a little bit about the process of getting down there. And so they get asked, have they made any comments, the people that the museum that's trying to analyze the carved inscriptions, have they made any comments about the symbols or carvings? And Zalitsky answers, Greek-like inscriptions. Greek-like? Well, hieroglyphic-like inscriptions. Hieroglyphic like Egypt? I said the lettering is Greek-like. Hold on just a minute. Why don't you talk to my boss? Okay, so Pauline Zalitsky goes forward here, and she says, I'm so happy to meet you, so on. Okay, so they have another conversation. Now, this is the second interview. And so they try to clarify some things about, are these Greek inscriptions that you're seeing? And she says, no, I was overhearing, and I don't want you to make any bad mistakes mixing Greek. That was my husband's mistake. So the husband apparently in reports had given these interviews saying they look like Greek. And she says, no, because it's not Greek. It has the same tendency, but it's not Greek. We don't know what it is, and scientists are trying to decipher it. Right, it has some resemblance. This is the question now. It has some resemblance to the lettering of Greek, but it's not Greek. Are there some pictographs that would fall into the hieroglyphic category as well? Now, this is Zalitsky. Yes, and symbols as well. There are different signs, more like American nature, they have found in Central America. Pyramids, strong delineation of the structures which suggest pyramidal type. American pyramidal type, not Egyptian pyramidal type. So they're finding Mayan pyramids, not Egyptian classic Great Pyramids, that kind of thing. And she clarifies it and so on. Then she said, are the caves underwater around the island, is that where the American cross has been found carved? Yes, and other symbology, other cosmic type depictions. And you find this in Cuban caves around the island, not only in the north, but in the south. These caves are underwater caves. One of the cave I know of is on land and has this type of symbology as well. So they go off about the caves for a little bit. But what I wanted to really point out there is that she's giving us this impression of what these different symbols look like. And Zalitsky wanted to show the crossed oval symbol and the spirals. So the image is from the Cuban Isle of Youth and restored by archaeologists, but there are a number of similar Cuban caves. That is the cross that she's referring to, that is showing up in the caves, but is also present there under the water in the ruins that she's seeing. And then here we have again, that is Zalitsky looking up at the ruins in the cave. So I think what's pretty clear from that is that Zalitsky is confirming for this much on the record, that not only has she seen the pyramids and she's related sphinxes and roads. Now, and the sphinxes do sound more Greek Egyptian, of course, than the Mayans. But the pyramids are clearly Mayan, and the structures look Mayan or Central American. The hieroglyphs are definitely Central American Mayan variety. So when we think of it this way, this culture is that kind of Poseidon culture that was there in Atlantis. When that sank, they were the ones who dispersed to the Inca and the Maya and that whole area. That's why it's so much more like that. But I think what she's confirming for us there on the record also is that she's seen some of the very same carvings and images like that cross and the spiral above ground in the caves as she's seen on the ruins below. That's crucial because it means that these two pieces were connected at one point. And I think what we're getting there is she's confirming on the record the extent of the ruins and the analysis that they were doing at the time, and that they had pictures that could go close up and look at inscriptions where you could actually identify things like hieroglyphics. So we've gone way beyond the stage of strange anomalies appearing in the water that might be a mound or might be whatever. She's looking at inscriptions. So in a way, the cat's already out of the bag. The question is, why are we in this strange twilight zone of radio silence about it? Here's out. Now, I want to do a quick update on this because when we get into what's happening there in the hot zone, something's come up which is in the Gulf of Mexico. And somebody called this the gumbo hot zone, which I thought was hilarious. But it's off the coast of Louisiana, right above the Yucatan, almost a straight line above it. And here's the story. Amateur archaeologists may have found an ancient city off the coast of St. Bernard. All I know is somebody built a city 12,000 years ago, and it stuck out in Chandeleur. These islands are uninhabited, and this guy has been on this story for decades. This is the story that's coming out. These things are coming up to the surface. And the things that he found, mystery 12,000-year-old underwater city with pyramids and energy field found off U.S. There are the Chandeleur Islands. Those are the headlines. Some of the headlines are screaming. And I noticed there's two versions of this story. One version where they take him seriously, and then the second version where they take the same exact story and they try to make him look foolish. Nonetheless, the guy's been working on it for 4 decades. And it seems very, very interesting. And I believe he's found the equivalent. He's kind of the modern day equivalent of Zalitsky's find 20 years previous. Archaeologist claims to have discovered a 12,000-year-old underwater city with pyramided energy field. That's the archaeologist. These are his claims. Off the coast of Louisiana, a retired architect claims to have discovered an ancient underwater city complete with pyramided energy field. George Gillet, an amateur archaeologist, has visited the ruins of a 12,000-year-old city 44 times. This isn't something that's an anomaly that just came up. He is seeing these ruins, and he's using sonar to figure out what's underneath. All right. Imagery is coming up around this. Some of the imagery is, he's saying these are large pyramids. And he's also saying that there's incredible effects, apotheum-style effects, Bermuda Triangle, magnetic disruption-style effects that are taking place in relation to this. So let's get our heads wrapped around this. I've been talking to you about land rising. We're going to discover these things. It's inevitable. And they're going to have problems blocking this story. So what they're going to have to do eventually is spin it. They're going to have to say, you know, oh, this was a culture, and, you know, they're going to have to change the human origin story.
Mesdames et messieurs, les journalistes, je vous présente Bagdat Djilali Difale.
Bonjour, très content de votre présence. Donc, c'est pour vous faire une très grande révélation. Je me suis intéressé tout au début à l'Arche de l'Alliance. J'ai commencé mes investigations dès les années 77, les années 80. Je suis reparti en Algérie, rejoindre mes parents, qui sont partis définitivement à Oran. Et de là, j'ai commencé à fréquenter le musée d'Oran, la bibliothèque municipale, la bibliothèque privée. Et c'est là que vraiment, là, il y a eu le grand déclic de l'archéologie, étant donné qu'il y a beaucoup de sites archéologiques en Algérie. Je vous les citerai pas parce que ce serait trop long, quoi. Et voilà, je me suis mis, j'en reviens à l'Arche de l'Alliance. Je l'ai cherché pendant 25 ans exactement. Et ce coffre, il est cité par les 3 plus grandes religions monothéistes dans la Torah, la Bible et le Coran. Et n'oublions pas que dans le Coran, il est cité en tant que prophète. Et c'est ce qui m'a donné la pression pour chercher ce coffre, ce fameux coffre. Et je me suis mis à le chercher, comme certains. Voilà. Donc, comment j'ai abouti au tombeau d'Alexandre le Grand? Je suppose que c'est le mausolée d'Alexandre, du fait qu'Alexandre est lié à cette arche. Il y a beaucoup de convergences. En fait, quand il a libéré l'Égypte, sous le joug de Darius, étant donné que c'était un royaume achémite, qui était l'empire de Darius, et les Égyptiens ont été ont beaucoup souffert de ce roi. Donc tout ce que vous voyez ici sont des accès. Il y a plusieurs accès qui n'ont pas été excavés pour accéder au tombeau dans cette nécropole royale. Au milieu, on accède à une petite niche où se trouve le sarcophage du roi des rois. Voilà. Sur le moment, croyez-moi, quand vous voyez un trésor comme ça, c'est indescriptible. Je ne peux pas vous décrire l'émotion. Je sentais, là, je ne suis pas arrivé à l'hôtel, là.
Et voilà, et si vous permettez, je vais juste demander à M. Mebarki une réaction sur ce que vous venez de voir.
Je ne vois pas l'adjectif que je pourrais utiliser pour commenter les images que nous venons de voir. D'autant plus que lorsque je suis arrivé, on m'a certifié que ces photos ont été authentifiées. Donc ce n'est pas, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, ce n'est pas un montage.
Et il y a plusieurs salles de trésors. En fait, il y a des arbres en or, et en guise de fruits, ce sont des diamants et des émeraudes et des rubis. En fait, il y a une partie du trésor de Babylone à l'intérieur. Je me suis libéré de cette promesse, et voilà, je suis devant vous, je vous le présente ici, et voilà. Et ça me libère, je suis libéré, voilà. Ça me soulage. Je veux que le monde entier sache que c'est une chose extraordinaire. Voilà, c'est tout ce que j'avais à dire. Voilà. Et c'est mon souhait. Merci beaucoup.
J'imagine qu'il y a des choses qui doivent rester secrètes dans la mesure où vous êtes dans un processus très complexe, notamment des sécurisations du site peut-être, mais il n'y a pas moyen donc de connaître la localisation exacte de cet endroit?
Je ne peux pas le révéler, je laisse la révélation à Son Altesse Royale, le roi de Jordanie. Merci beaucoup, du fond du cœur.
Carmen, would you say in your career that this discovery may be one of the most exciting ones that you've heard about?
Absolutely. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is.
And I was thinking about the question that you asked before, like, why didn't it go public? But the thing is, if people haven't heard something before, they tend to reject it. And, we're so conditioned to just have things repeated and repeated, and then to repeat things that we see on the news. And things are quite controlled. So it's really a psychological construct in itself that, there couldn't be anything bigger than this. The discoverer himself told me that it's 1,000 times bigger than King Tut.
It's huge. It's huge. And
so when you think about why not just go in there and, have the cameras ready and all that, okay. But then what once it's open? With 14 National Guards, who's going to protect that? And it's a game changer. The tagline for the foundation is, ushering an era of peace and prosperity to the Middle East. Well, we know there's forces against that. So this could change all of humanity, in terms of really understanding the distant past and all of that. But from everything I've done in my career, there seems to be everything operating against that.
I think Cleopatra's tomb and Alexander the Great's, that's a great discovery, but I'm excited about the Ark of the Covenant. To me, that echoes the Bible. When you hear things and read things in the Bible, and then you're able to verify it scientifically or in any other way, that authenticates the Bible stories. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And
for me, it's the material from the Library of Alexandria.
Yeah, that's great,
now,
too.
Think about the teams that would be necessary to go in there. It could be 20 years of research easily. Okay, so there's going to be DNA testing. There's going to be dating. First of all, cataloging of everything. And then, the idea of 3D replicas of various artifacts and scrolls. Computational linguistics, teams of linguists that can translate the information that's in there. But again, there's corruption in the dating labs. There's few people who understand how to use computational linguistics. That happens to be what my PhD is in, and would the people who did the translation have it right? Or so you'd have to have it double blind.
It'd have to be double, at least.
Researching the team, pardon me?
It'd have to be at least double, checked and rechecked by different sources.
Right, and then they even suggested the idea of an oracle department. And so what kind, how many channels are actually coming up with things about it? And, who was Alexander the Great that he, in another life that he ended up being there? And, those sorts of things are really interesting to me. And so it's strategically moving forward, but I'll tell you this, I heard about it 3 years ago.
Well, that's you're in the know, though.
But not anything about it or where or anything, just one person who knows a lot of stuff, who keeps his mouth shut about a lot of things, said they found the tomb of Alexander the Great, And I know because he keeps my secrets not to pry them open.
Right.
Right? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And I had the same kind of reaction, like, how do you know? What do you mean? Like, where's the verifiability on
Tell me
it?
more. Tell me more.
But you can't. You can't with somebody like that. And so then when it came up again, and they approached me, because I do have experience with a lot of these things, not to be doing it all, but to certainly supervising teams and whatnot. And they already knew about my work, but the real link is geoscans, the high definition satellite, how they find things that are deep under the earth that can go as deep as 6 miles. No, kilometers.
That's still dramatic. That is still dramatic.
And it has always been accurate.
Now,
there wasn't as much verifiability with it because they hadn't gone and dug to the places that they did these scans. The other thing is everybody's suffering from non-disclosure agreements. So even the person who helped, there was a pair of people scientists who developed the logarithms for the scans. So there's a different logarithm on a live high-definition satellite scan. There's one for water, one for pottery, one for gold, precious metals, precious jewels, right? And so they just run the scan with a different formula for each element, right? And so when they were, doing some work with some, anti-gravity and that sort of thing, they fired the guy and made him sign a 20-year non-disclosure agreement, right? And actually, I feel quite privileged here, that they're even talking to me, but when the non-disclosure agreement after 20 years was lifted, I got a phone call. I didn't know who to call.
Are they cringing because you're talking about it in some form or fashion tonight?
No, they've invited me to.
They have, okay, so they know what's going on.
But the thing is, they also asked me to cancel my schedule, and so I stopped, I said no to interviews, and, then I thought, well, this is kind of fun not to have to do interviews, and, to kind of have my schedule to myself, and then they said, go, talk. But, see, the discoverer is French, and that's his only language.
Huh, okay.
And, everybody doesn't have the ability to present just because they discovered something. Not that he does or doesn't, but the point of the matter is that going public with something is different than the discovery. And I'm cringing a little bit because I've been sitting on this since March. The meeting
and that's not like
Paris was April 2nd to 4th. And I'm like, well, what's the reaction going to be, and then what? And the thing is moving forward, and humanity deserves to know.
Of course, it's history. It's part of this planet.
And history has been messed up, and we haven't been told the truth. And, research on Atlantis is so obscure, and people come to me. They know everything. You know how know-it-alls get.
Sure.
They know everything about it because they figured something out, and somebody did a channel message, and they're in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th dimension, and then, they got a flood because they were, doing experiments with animals and humans. Well, what if Atlantis went on for 60,000 years? You can't just take one day out of it and say you know everything about it.
Exactly.
We have lost, pardon me?
Especially, they may have had the incredible technology, flying machines, everything.
Yeah, and we've lost our ability to discern. So much of the information and the data has been erased, and we've been told what to think, and so school turns us into repeaters. The teacher has the right answer, the one right answer hypothesis, and we repeat. The news repeats. You go to a dinner party, and everybody's repeating something they read or they heard. Well, the people who own the media have a storyline and a narrative that they want us to know. So they lock everything in to, the basket of whatever, UFOs, oh, that's crazy, or whatever. And everybody's got the opinion that someone has is the opinion of what they listen to. So to open your mind to the truth, which you're a person who has been doing that for your whole career, is also tricky.
There seems to be enough gold in this tomb to upgrade the level of the economy of Jordan for the rest of its existence.
Well, or the whole world if they shared it.
Or the whole world. That's
say anything.
Well, I think it's dramatic that it could be Cleopatra's sarcophagus. That's amazing. But the Ark of the Covenant, that to me is phenomenal. If it ends up being that.
I saw the picture. How do you have melted ruby and the gold is still intact? Like, it is a phenomenal machine. And there's something else that I haven't said. When the discoverer went in there in the first place, he goes down the stairs into the thing, and then he felt like he was hit in the head with a 2x4. And it's like, well, what's that? And he looks around. He's by himself. He's got an oxygen mask and, the light and the whole thing. He's
got to be nervous, and his heart's beating like crazy, probably.
Well, because anything you've been looking for 20 years when, and no. And that was kind of like me, when I found some stuff in Egypt that I looked for 10 years. No. When yes is yes, the no.
It's exciting.
We know what no is, and there's a difference, right?
Yeah,
so,
sure is.
Oh,
sure
no.
But he feels like somebody bopped him in his head?
Well, But
like an energy burst or something?
Yeah, not burst. A protective energetic wall, and this was one of the, well, wall isn't the word either. This was the topic. I mean, I was writing notes like mad in this meeting.
It's like a force field.
Like a force field. And there has been discussion, and this isn't my topic, quantum physics, how that would have happened. The other thing is that the salt in the salt mine has acted as a preservative of some kind.
Right.
And this wasn't, the conclusion, I think, that a few of us on the inside circle have come to is that it wasn't supposed to be found.
Ever.
Clues.
These gold statues that you said are life-size, are they plated, or do you think they're all gold, 100%?
Solid.
Oh, my God.
And there's Isis figures, there's caryatids that are like the female figures that hold up the part of the Parthenon. And there's a lot of feminine stuff in there, me and the matriarchal, and life-size horses and chariots and Alexander himself. It's stunning.
I bet.
Here we go. Astonishing. Sarcophagus, highly resembling the one in Tut's tomb. Breathtaking in its detail. And here, the statues of Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, and assorted gods of ancient Egypt. Just staggering in its implication. Initial dating, 10,000 BC. Completely rewrites history. Now let's get into the new ones.
But there were some coins. Well, look at these. I mean, they almost look like Smarties. But there's ones that are the exact thing from Knossos.
Amazing. They look like they're in excellent condition, and again, from a later time period here, so there may be a tradition of hiding artifacts in this mountain.
Until they basically had to stash it. Look at this for a bronze.
Oh, that is almost Grecian looking.
I know, it's just simply amazing. And all this goddess stuff.
Huh.
Right, this is how the pictures came to me.
Oh, do you ever wonder about your amazing luck in these matters? You seem to be a magnet for them.
Right? And so how that ended up in my, hands is remarkable to me, but it's true. So I was told that James Ernest Brown was sending me the 16 millimeter footage of Lead Scallion. The next morning is when these pictures started to come across in one of my meetings.
That's fascinating.
And, and then when the Geoscans guys gag order was lifted, he contacted me. I mean, you got to understand, for me, I'm like, how is this happening?
Unbelievable.
It's totally great and amazing. And even the idea of where I'm called to go next, in Europe, and there's possibly pyramids there. It's like, what is this? It's quite...
Well, you're getting all these signals as you bring Atlantis to the surface, it seems like.
So look at this one, even has an elephant from Atlantis. It's an Atlantean elephant. And this is a lamp that has 2 different spigots. This is the kind of stuff they're finding. Isn't it amazing?
Well, that these different finds are all related to one major excavation is very interesting.
And look at this.
What is that?
A miniature mummy.
Wow. Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, these are great. These are absolutely stunning. All right, we've saved the best for last. Evidence is pointing to the fact that this represents an Atlantean princess of extreme antiquity. The sarcophagus dating came back 10,000 BC. This could, in fact, be older.
Yeah, and let's just keep the conversation going here. This is a wooden life-size statue that must be Thai. So those are jewels inlaid into gold. Oops, same one. Look at the headpiece. Look at this stuff. Isn't that just incredible?
Wow.
I know, super wow. Okay, so go ahead. What were you saying?
We're looking at an Atlantean crown.
Yeah, it's a crown that goes with this, and it goes with this outfit. So the jewels, see those
I see.
breasts? Maybe not, because she's on her side. But when you see I've seen other ones where it's actually those pants that gather at the ankle.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a life-size statue.
This, from all the data, is an Atlantean princess.
Yeah.
The fact that she's linked with the Amarna artifacts is suggesting a lineage, perhaps Atlantis to Egypt. That's what it looks like. We're going to need to explore the gap of time from 10,000 BC to 1300 BC and Amarna, and that's Atlantis to Egypt, and who this Atlantean princess was, and the legacy into Egypt.
And if you look at that and then notice, I'm just trying to get some coordination here. Look at this. Does that not remind you of the same thing from Knossos? Now, the other thing is you're not in a warring situation if you spend that much time on your hair.
Right. I know, they're looking great.
So, look at this.
This is fascinating. It's almost like a victory cup.
But it's all jeweled. Like incredibly neat. And so these came in both silver and gold.
Mm-hmm.
Back of it is an owl.
Oh.
Which is really speaking to the idea of Artemis and all of that. Now, where's the rest of those? Oh, and this is a falcon made out of 8,000 diamonds.
Yeah, it's incredible. That's almost like Assyrian or something.
Well, I would have guessed Persian.
Persian, yeah.
Right? So, it's quite fascinating. I thought there were a few more here.
These are incredible.
They're incredible.
The range of style, I think, is so interesting.
Absolutely. But there were some things. There's all that electric ancient Egyptian stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some of these. We'll even look at these vases. Look at them. They're like ancient Fimo.
Oh yeah, those are fascinating.
So these aren't all in order, but there's stuff from like Artemis. See, there's the coins. This is just the whole collection. These tiny books.
What are these bearded men? What's going on there?
Well, that's just a huge tapestry. But they've got the feather, and that's a snake wrapped around him.
This is like Atlantis imagery when I see that.
Well, we don't really, it's hard to say where it's all from, but it is part of the find.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm looking for that. I thought I'd copied them. Artemis and Medusa, straight out of my book. All the goddess-centered stuff. This, well, I think I showed you this last time. That's like an emerald the size of a credit card.
Let's see that one.
So I'll take a screenshot of it and then I'll put it in the folder for you.
Yeah, that is incredible.
Well, there's so much riches, and then there's, suitcases full of gold bars and amazing stuff. But look at this thing. I'm going to rotate this a couple of times. Rotate clockwise. And rotate it again. Now, they said this was 40,000 years old. Found in the Amazon, like the Amazon warrior women.
Mm-hmm.
In their stash. Look at that.
Oh, it does look like this
the victory kind of.
Yeah, right.
Incredible stuff.
Fascinating.
Yes. And then there's all these mosaics in the ground. Here, this is one of them. This is like pure goddess-centered stuff.
All right.
With little angels. So I'm going to put these into the folder. And look at this is Medusa. There's a Medusa right there.
Oh yeah, right in the middle.
And that's a hair comb, right? And then one more of Artemis here. With, so she's a virgin goddess with many breasts. And all that stuff from Knossos. The women are bare-breasted.
Mm-hmm.
So the three I was looking for. So So you can't say, you know, that it's not goddess-centered.
Oh, absolutely.
If they're bare-breasted, I mean, it's just simply incredible. And like I said, no warring stuff, almost no boy stuff.
And now there is the picture of the Atlantean princess, which we have shown. And one of the things I think is so important about that one is that you've talked about this posture, that this was a standing statue of a kind of regal princess from Atlantis.
Well, it would have been standing, but that was lying down just simply because it was stuffed into a stash.
I gotcha. Gotcha.
But it would have had to have been a standing posture. But these things are all just thrown around in a cave.
Right, yeah.
But it really did look Thai because of the hand position, the headdress, and the pants were kind of gathered at the ankle.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a Thai style.
Just amazing. And of course, for context, here's the original shot of the find with Akhenaten and Amenhotep III. Same location here, which suggests a massive hideaway of ancient artifacts related to Atlantis and goddess symbolism, really. This is a massive, largely untapped excavation site in a mountain in Turkey.
Now, the Turkey find that has the 10 rooms inside the mountain that they locked is the gold Nefertiti Akhenaten with a lot of other rooms that they hadn't opened. They had only opened 4 of the 10.
Just amazing. I can only imagine what else is hiding out there. And speaking of hiding out, are the investigators and the Turkish treasure hunters safe? And what kind of a status update can you give us on them and the site? Are there any indications that they had to hand the material over to the military?
I have no information that they had to give it away. My information is that it was locked and it wasn't safe for them to go back.
Fascinating. Well, it makes sense with the military turmoil in that area right now, but it is the team that locked the site, right? It's not the military.
Yep.
Okay, that's good.
Like I had personal contact with the people who found it.
Good. I hope to hear that they have access again soon. Carmen, just amazing. And as we close out this episode, I noticed a lot of Knossos and Crete-style imagery in this batch. Now, can you tell us the significance of the Atlantean colonies in this context?
All the pictures, they're matriarchal and they're gold. And all of that stuff that we saw, the bare-breasted women from Knossos. Knossos has been associated with Atlantis, the bull riding, acrobatics, all that kind of stuff. So I think that what's at Knossos is the closest that we have of some kind of colony of people that were related to the Atlanteans somehow. Hot and cold running water, 2-3-story temples, just a huge sophistication of commerce and art that you just don't see anywhere else.
It's likely to be, if we can connect these dots. We've got Atlantean colonies here, and
U.S. Air Force Airman 2nd Class Carl Wolf became an accidental witness to the first photos developed showing bases on the dark side of the moon. He saw multinational top clearance access individuals secretly huddling over the photos that looked to clearly show structures protruding over the lunar landscape, photographed by Lunar Orbiter 1 in 1966. As a director of intelligence for the U.S. Air Force Tactical Air Command at Langley, Virginia, beginning in 1965, he was privy to all Apollo mission photographs sent to Earth during their missions around and to the moon. As to the Lunar Orbiter 1 photos in 1966, he believed these photos would be revealed to the world within days or weeks. Over 30 years went by in absolute silence. He eventually realized this story was much bigger than anything he ever imagined. Not only were the moon structures of non-earthly origin, but upon his retirement from the Air Force, he was yet to see disclosure of these findings at all. He came forward to talk about it long after retiring from the U.S. military in 2001, when he joined Dr. Stephen Greer at the Disclosure Project National Press Club event in Washington, D.C., alleging NASA was intentionally covering up their findings. He knew this to be true firsthand.
Good morning. My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance. in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. In 1965, in mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA on Langley Field. Dr. Colley was in charge of that project. They had problems with a piece of electronic equipment that was bottlenecking their production of photographs. I went to the facility, and when I walked into the facility, there were scientists from all over the world. I was stunned, actually, to see people at a NASA project from all over the world. It didn't make any sense to me initially. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. A Airman Second Class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an Airman Second Class. I was interested in how the whole process functioned, how the data got from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory. I asked the young man if he'd describe the process to me. He did. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point, I was very concerned because I knew we were working on compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
The United States government, for example, demands astronomers, astronauts, and many other workers at NASA sign an oath of confidentiality. Upon breaking this oath, you could face a conviction of treason, a crime which carries the death penalty. However, regardless of this, over the past few years, more and more individuals from around the world have bravely began to blow the whistle on these secrecies. Dr. Ken Johnston, former director of NASA's Department of Photographic Evidence, has stated that during his stay at the agency, he was able to see original photos of countless ruins, pyramids, and intact temples all resting upon the moon. Not only are there now a number of independent testimonies made by numerous figures from within these space agencies and the accompanying programs, confessing to the concealment of ancient ruins on the moon's surface, but we also have compelling physical evidence of such structures, including photographs released by NASA themselves. One was snapped by the Apollo 17 astronauts in 1972. Subsequently uploaded to the official NASA website, it was originally labeled as overexposed. However, as technology has evolved and computer software has become more inept at refining images, it has revealed something amazing. Along with apparent pyramidal structure, clearly seen within this image, some investigators have also highlighted a possible monolith in the foreground. Was Space Odyssey trying to tell us something? Predictably, many people have come forward attempting to discredit this discovery. Yet, fortunately for us, in the December of 2008, the Hubble Space Telescope took some extremely intriguing images of its own. Images which seem to corroborate the once overexposed Apollo photo. Do these images actually show ancient ruins upon the surface of the moon? If this is the case, how did they get there? Or more importantly, who could have built them? Are these relics proof of an ancient space-going civilization? Or maybe extraterrestrial activity? Regardless of how they got there, we find their existence highly compelling and could be perceived as a possible motive for turning the space programs into black projects. Maybe we did go back to the moon. It's just most were never told about it. After all, knowledge is power.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Donna Hare, and I worked at Philco Ford Aerospace from 1967 to 1981. During that time, I was a design illustrator, draftsman. I did the launch slides and landing slides, and also projection plotting boards, lunar maps for NASA. We were a contractor, but most of the time I worked on site excuse me, in Building 8. I had the opportunity to do extra work during downtime, which was between missions, and I walked into a photo lab, which was the NASA lab across the hallway. I had a secret clearance, which is not that high, but I was able to go into restricted areas, which this was. At the time, I was talking to one of the techs in there, and he drew my attention to a photograph, a NASA photograph. It had a dot on it, and I said, "What is that?" Well, he drew my attention to it, and I said, "Is that a dot on the emulsion?" And he said, and he's smiling, and he has his hands crossed, and he said, "Round dots on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground." And this was an aerial photograph of the Earth, I'm assuming the Earth, because it had pine trees on it, and the shadows of the craft, or whatever it was, were in the same angle as the trees. And by its very nature, UFO, and I wanted to clarify that to a gentleman that was talking to me, means unidentified. So I did not know what this was. But I realized at this point that it's very secret, that it was kept secret, because I asked him, "What are you going to do with this piece of information?" And he said, "We always airbrush these out before we sell them to the public." So they're pesky little creatures appearing on this photograph they wanted to get rid of. After that, I decided I would ask questions to other people that work there. And I found that I had to ask them away from the site and not on site. A guard told me that he was asked to burn some photographs and not to look at them. And there was another guard guarding him, who was in green fatigues, watching him burn the photographs. And he said he was too tempted. He looked at one, and it was a picture of a UFO, and he was very descriptive. I can go into that later with anyone. He immediately was hit in the head, and he had a big gash in his forehead. He was knocked out, and he's terrified, so he would have to be protected. Another incident, I knew someone in quarantine with the Apollo astronauts. He told me that the Apollo astronauts saw craft on the moon when we landed, and that is what he told me. And he also was afraid. He said that the astronauts are told to keep this quiet. They're not allowed to talk about it. So I do want to let you know that I worked out there for a number of years, and I ran into this. So it's not something everyone knows that works out there for a long time. My boss didn't know about it. Some people that sat right next to me didn't know about it. It's very strange, because I don't know how they can do it, but they can let some people know about it and then others not. I'm willing to testify before Congress that what I'm saying is true, and thank you very much. Thank you.
And you know this. For years, Neil Armstrong refused to be interviewed. I found that to be one of the strangest things of anything. You would think that the first man on the moon, the national hero that he is, would have talked to everyone about the experience, about the wonder. That didn't happen.
His role model was Lindbergh, and Lindbergh became a very public person and was very much out there with his political views and all that. You'd think that Neil would have at least wanted to be a role model for the next generation. Instead, he became essentially a recluse, a hermit. And on every anniversary, they would wind him up and trot him out in public. The most interesting one was during the Clinton years at the White House on the 25th anniversary, where, do you remember what Armstrong said, the most stunning thing that an astronaut could say, and I think in this milieu get away with it?
Give us the quote.
Well, he said two things. At the start of his speech, he compared himself and the other astronauts to birds, to parrots. And he then made a joke, and he said, and parrots don't fly very well. Well, what else do parrots do, George?
They repeat what they're told.
Are told.
Plant his foot on the surface of the moon has been a pioneer in many ways. And Mr. Armstrong, in asking you to come to the podium, may I say that millions of Americans have admired you not only for your achievement, but for the quiet dignity with which you have conducted yourself and represented not only our country, but humankind. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Mr. President, members of Congress, fellow astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Wilbur Wright once noted that the only bird that could talk was the parrot, and he didn't fly very well. So I'll be brief. This week, America has been recalling the Apollo program and reliving the memories of those times in which so many of us here, colleagues here in the first rows, were immersed. Our old astrogeology mentor, Gene Shoemaker, even called in one of his comets to mark the occasion with spectacular Jovian fireworks. And reminding us once again of the power and consequence of celestial extracurricular activities. Many Americans were part of Apollo, about 1 or 2 in each 1,000 citizens, all across the country. They were asked by their country to do the impossible, to envisage, to design, and to build a method of breaking the bonds of Earth's gravity, and then sally forth and visit another heavenly body. The principal elements, leaving Earth, navigating in space, and descending to a planet unencumbered with runways and traffic controls, would include the major requirements necessary for a spacefaring people. Today, a space shuttle flies overhead with an international crew. A number of countries have international space programs. During the space age, we have increased the knowledge of our universe 1,000-fold. Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief. Those challenges are yours. In many fields, not the least of which is space, because there lies human destiny.
Your idealistic faces riveted on the first man on the moon, talking to them, and he looked at them and he said, "There are wonders beyond belief. There are truths to be revealed if one can remove truth's protective layers." Now, where in the world does one get the idea the truth has to have protection to be found out?
So, how long did this situation go on? How long has this been going on Mars? Roughly 4 billion years. We're looking at a planet that apparently had life on it, massive photosynthesis, oceans of water, a greenhouse, and it lasted apparently around 4 billion years. That's a lot, hell of a lot different than what they say. I'm sorry. That's very different from the lunar Mars synthesis. Now, what happened? That's what Mars used to look like, apparently. And now it looks different. Apparently Mars was also a site of a catastrophe of some sort. What sort of catastrophe? Well, Mars did suffer a very large impact late in its geologic time. It's the Leo impact. It's the Chicxulub Mars. It's almost the same size as Chicxulub, only it happened to a planet only half the radius of Earth, so 1/4 of the surface area, and it was a not a planet that only got half of the sun. So Mars was kind of running on the edge, and then this impact occurred. Just to show you where the Leo impact was. It's right there, north. So you can see it happened in a place where there are hardly any craters. This happened on the young part of Mars. Now, we also know, however, that life is very durable, especially if you're already living close to the asteroid belt and getting whacked periodically. If you have an ocean of water, that stores an enormous amount of atmospheric gas, or CO2, and also serves as a big thermal flywheel. So Mars had a big stabilizing element in the ocean. So this would have mitigated, to some degree, the effects of any big impact. However, it makes a good story. And, you know, it's like, okay, Mars is next to the asteroid belt, and finally it got whacked. And couldn't survive it. So, however, it's like a good Sherlock Holmes story. Yeah, but the dog didn't bark. And there's something fishy about this. Mars is not only exotic in being like displaying an Earth-like past, it also has some very strange isotopic anomalies relative to other solar system reservoirs. In particular, it has a lot more xenon 129 than xenon 132. Everywhere else in the solar system, including the comet they landed on, those two are almost the same. They're the same on Earth, the same on Jupiter, the same in the solar wind, the same in ground-up meteorites from the asteroid belt, except on Mars. Mars sticks out like a big sore thumb. Where have we seen something like this before? There's only one place. It's called an R process. There's a well-known meteorite in the meteoritics community. It's not from Mars, by the way. It's called Allende. It's carbonaceous chondrite 2, type 2. It was famous because it was the first meteorite where they identified a lot of organics. Apparently came from the asteroid belt. It's 4.5 billion years old. And in it has kind of tarry stuff in it, and then this dust. And the dust is very refractive. Apparently we're looking at grains of the original high-temperature solar nebula. When you take out those, when you dissolve with solvent or tar and isolate just that dust, the sample of the original primordial solar nebula, and heat that dust until all of the gas comes out, the xenon isotope spectrum matches Mars' atmosphere almost exactly. It's because it's from a supernova. And that's been well established. So, however, there's another place where we see our process. And yes, and nuclear weapons. We know a supernova did not go off on Mars. There wouldn't be any Mars there. Something resembling a supernova. At least that is the only known phenomenon that gives the xenon spectrum and the other radiation. I haven't given this a half-hour talk. I haven't gone into the other radiation features on Mars. Apparently the surface of Mars was bombarded by high-energy neutrons at some point in recent geologic time. So, we love a mystery. Cause of death of Mars, unknown. By the way, it happened just about the same time as the great Permian extinction. It's killed off 95% on Earth. The oceans died in extinction. Only the cockroaches. You should ask them what happened. But went under deep hypnosis, he couldn't get him to talk about stayed alive, past life. Anyway, summary. There are water channels over wide ages and, of course, an ocean bed. That means we had to have had a stable greenhouse, not just a flash in the pan greenhouse. The only way to get a stable greenhouse we know of and explain what we see on Mars is it had to have a massive amount of oxygen. The only way to get a massive amount of oxygen is the same way we get it on Earth, photosynthesis. Photolysis is self-limiting. Photosynthesis, though, goes explosively. So we had to have a biosphere on Mars. And apparently we had a stable Martian diet for a long, long time. Millions of years. And then we had some catastrophe. I just add this at the bottom. It's not a safe concept. Mullon says strange things have happened in the solar system. And planets like Earth have been reduced to Mars. Apparently the universe is fully capable of doing that. So, that's all I have for right now. Any questions? Yes?
I assume you're proposing that a supernova killed off Mars.
No, I'm not proposing that. Because it would have killed off everything else in the solar system.
Yeah, that's right.
It would have destroyed. You can't have a supernova on Mars. But the xenon from this R process matches Mars' atmosphere. And it's funny, no one will talk about it either. No one. They don't talk about it. Even though the Allende meteorite from old Mexico is a famous meteorite, well known. It's one of these things where when they landed on Mars and took the samples of the Mars atmosphere, saw that big spike at Xenon 129, a bunch of guys looked around the table at each other, and then somebody said, well, is there any comments? No. Yes?
How high do you estimate
As a result, I'm Stevie from WhatCulture.com, and here are the 9 strangest things spotted on Mars. Number 9. Pyramid. When this strangely angular rock was photographed by the Curiosity rover in 2015, UFO fanatics immediately cried pyramid. Some conspiracy theorists believe that the ancient Egyptians were not advanced enough to build pyramids without the help of extraterrestrials. Could this be the solution? Number 8. Rodent. Fans of the Curiosity's photo uploads were surprised to spot a small, furry mammal in this 2013 image. Commenters argued over whether it most resembled a rat, squirrel, or a gopher. Number 7. Sarcophagus. The pyramid is not the only ancient Egyptian anomaly to have been found on the Red Planet. This outcrop resembles a pharaoh's coffin, with face, headdress, and possibly even a false beard. Number 6. Monolith. This large, flat object stands upright in an otherwise empty crater, resembling some kind of monument. Number 5. Gorilla. This completely unedited photo was taken by Spirit in 2003. It depicts something that undoubtedly resembles a mountain gorilla. Number 4. Face. Amongst a pile of otherwise unremarkable rubble, this boulder has oddly human-like features. The apparent beard led several media outlets to dub it the face of God. Number 3. Reptile. With eyes, legs, a tail and a mouth, this Mars anomaly took the media by storm when it surfaced in 2012. However, NASA refused to turn the rover around to investigate, as it would have cost them literally millions of dollars. Number 2. Humanoid. This photo by Curiosity shows what has been described by some as a humanoid figure. Ufologists likened its gait to the subject of Roger Patterson's 1967 video of an alleged Bigfoot. Number 1. Giant crab. In July 2015, Curiosity beamed back a horrifying image that seemed to show a large, crab-like creature sitting in the mouth of a cave. Enhancing the image reveals a set of spindly limbs and what could be a pincer. NASA refused to investigate. Did we miss any out?
Let's go to our esteemed Honourable Paul Hellyer of Canada. We would give you 20 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. And thank you, Steve, for the invitation. My name, as I said, was Paul Hellyer. I'm a former Minister of National Defence for Canada. I served in 3 governments during a total of 23.5 years as a Member of Parliament. Although as Minister of National Defence, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested due to a young man from Ottawa sending me material on the subject. I told him I was too busy to read it, but he had confidence that someday I would. He sent me a copy of Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. It took me a while to get around to reading it, but I took it for my summer reading in 2005 and was really impressed with what was contained in it. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. And so after confirming the contents of the book with a retired United States Air Force general, I accept the invitation of Victor Vigiani, who's over here somewhere, and his cohort Mike Bird to speak to a symposium at the University of Toronto. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally. Since then, I've learned a lot from many sources, including a number of the fantastic witnesses that we have heard these last 4 days. They were so outstanding, I was just really blown away with them, the amount of information that was available. And I appreciate every single one of them. But because I'm not a ufologist, I'm a politician, there are only a few things that I want to add in that particular realm. First is that about in the 1960s sometime, there was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe. And the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously, they had thought maybe they were Russian and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, the investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well.
And Edgar D. Mitchell, the 6th man to walk on the moon. And after years of research, their verdict is unequivocal.
I happen to be privileged enough to have be in on the fact that we have been visited on this planet. And the UFO phenomenon is real, although it's been covered up by our governments for quite a long time.
Whoa! Hang on a minute, but this is big. Whoa! This is all of this is quite a shock to me.
Well, I'm sorry you haven't been reading the papers recently. It's starting to open up quite a bit.
So you're telling me? Well, there's a lot of information to take on board. Hang on a minute. I mean, listen, I've heard crazy UFO nuts tell me this kind of thing before. I've never had Dr. Ed Mitchell, the 6th man to walk on the moon, a respected scientist in his own right, announced to me that we've been visited by aliens from other planets and that they definitely are out there. There's no debating it.
Well, that's the first time you've ever talked to me, or I've told you about it before.
One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers, and I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working with, first of all, he was scared out of his skin, but after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gunnery range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology.
Знаете абсолютно все. Ну вот, например, прилетали на Землю инопланетяне. Эти самые зеленые человечки.
Малян, значит, рассказываю вам первый и последний раз. Вместе с передачей чемодана с ядерными кодами президенту страны приносят специальную папку. На ней написано «Совершенно секретно». И она целиком и полностью посвящена пришельцам, которые посетили нашу планету. Одновременно предоставляется доклад от абсолютно закрытой спецслужбы, которая занимается контролем пришельцев на территории нашей страны. Значит, 2 эти папки передаются вместе с ядерным чемоданом. После прекращения полномочий, соответственно, эти папки передаются новому президенту. Более подробную информацию на эту тему вы можете получить, посмотрев известный хроникально-документальный фильм «Люди в черном». Вышло несколько версий.
Сколько их среди нас?
Сколько их среди нас, рассказывать не буду, потому что это может вызвать панику.
And they were making fun of him in a lot of the articles I read because they thought he was talking about the movies Men in Black that we all watched. But in reality, he was talking about a documentary called Men in Black. But it only verifies his standing even more because there really is a documentary. It's Russian called Men in Black. Thank you for coming and watching this episode of Changing Your Worldview. Don't forget there will be a part 2 uploaded shortly after this one of the Russian documentary, and I hope you all take the time to watch it. Trust me, it's a good watch if you like documentaries, and it's not as long as a traditional documentary. I know it has subtitles, but as always, the truth isn't easy to come by. So have a great day, and thank you for coming. Much appreciated.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Clifford Stone. I was a Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I had a secret clearance with nuclear surety. I could get the clearance that I needed to do whatever it was that was necessary for me to do at the time on special operations when I was called in on those. What I'm referring to here is that I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers, for lack of a better term, debris thereof. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive. While we were doing all this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it. I'd like to go into detail on some of the cases about the nuts and bolts cases right here, but I will be available if you have any questions concerning my involvement in this. You can talk to Dr. Greer to arrange for me to get to talk to you. But the whole situation is, we've set back, we've told the American people that there's no such thing as UFOs. I've been involved where we have recovered these objects. We know them to be of extraterrestrials. In 1969, I had an event that happened to me while I was stationed at Fort Lee, Virginia. We went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. That would be my first exposure to any time that we would be recovering an unidentified flying object. When we went there, we already had people that was already in the facility. We were a backup team, which was supposed to be NBC because there was supposed to be some nuclear materials that was on board this craft. Later on, most people involved were to be told that there was nothing on board it. It was nothing more than just a crash of one of our aircraft. I know better because I was one of the people that approached it with a Geiger counter to get surface readings. I was the first person to go ahead and see that there were bodies on it. That would be the first of approximately 12 events. UFO crashes are not events that take place every day. They're rare. I know we're not alone in the universe. I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's evidence that has been denied to the American people. I stand before you today in my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people for no reason. Thank you.
As well. Yes, sir.
So I think my question is actually to Clifford Stone. You said that you had seen aliens on a craft that had crashed. I wondered if you could describe what they looked like.
I could, but it would probably take a whole lot of time. The reason I state that, when I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species. You have individuals that look very much like you and myself that could walk among us and you wouldn't even notice the difference, except for some of the things that they might be able to go ahead, even in a dark room, and touch an object and go ahead and identify what color that object might be. They would have a heightened sense of smell, sight, hearing. The situation is that you have various types of what we normally call grays. We didn't call them grays in the military, but you had at least 3 types of the grays. You had some that were much taller than we were. The unique thing that I'd like to point out for the most part is that the entities that we did catalog were in fact humanoid. Now this created a situation where the scientific community was trying to figure out why that would be the case, because you would expect that if life evolved on other planets that they would take on some type of other being, so to speak, not necessarily look humanoid or be bipedal such as we are. But apparently we got quite a few of the species out there that are humanoid in appearance, and that creates a question that yet has to be answered by science.
Yes, and as I call on you, please state the news agency.
The aliens won't let it happen. You reveal all their secrets. They exercise strict control over us.
Now, you know, there are a lot of people that are going to examine your facial expressions here, every twitch, everything, and say, and of course, so did you look? Did you see? Did you explore?
I can't reveal anything.
Oh, really? Because President Clinton said he did go right in, and he did check, and there was nothing.
Well, you know, that's what we're instructed to say.
One of the most powerful elements of the structure of secrecy has to do with the infiltration and control over mainstream media.
It's a media of belief, a media of belief. The whole media is controlled by a few corporations thanks to deregulation by the FCC.
You mean Disney, Fox, Westinghouse, and good old GE?
They own networks from CBS to CNBC.
They can use them to say whatever they please and put down the opinions of anyone who disagrees.
We've observed firsthand the intelligence community influencing the media when they're trying to cover this story. We have memoranda after memoranda after memoranda citing the psychological warfare and propaganda value of the subject. This is a very important thing for the public to understand. How do you keep something secret? You hide it in plain sight.
And I suspect that unless the Defense Department proves us otherwise, that it was probably some form of an alien spacecraft. And I think as a public figure you have to be very careful about what you say, because people can have pretty emotional reactions, and I said my goal wasn't to try to stir the pot.
And now I'll ask Officer Stein and his colleagues to escort the accused into the room so that we may all look upon the guilty party. Don't get him too close to me, please.
In the alien costume, the governor's chief of staff.
Now, this just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
So it's there. Everyone, I mean, there's 5% of the U.S. population have seen these objects. But you create an environment where the subject is so pilloried and ridiculed that no respectable scientist or doctor would want to be identified with it.
Internal documents from the Defense Department and intelligence agencies explicitly stating that they want to have this campaign of ridiculing and destroying the credibility of completely credible, completely honest eyewitnesses to UFO sightings and even sightings of extraterrestrial beings on the ground, that they want them discredited. They want their credibility destroyed.
If someone comes out and says, I saw a UFO on TV, the only ones that see a UFO in the TV programs are the rednecks out in the country that are going coon hunting or alligator hunting at night. You don't find anybody with any kind of smarts or some professional individual saying, hey, last night, let me tell you what I saw.
And this officially was released by the CIA, talking about how they have people embedded in all the major media to change, alter, and affect stories to their benefit.
You are fake news.
So every news agency, every television, radio station in the Albuquerque or Santa Fe area had our snitches in there. So we knew, and we paid them. We paid them good money. One of the reasons you get the people is you pay them, and that was controversial. That was somewhat controversial.
Do you know of national media that have had?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm not going to name them.
We now have relationship with reporters from every underlined major wire service, newspaper, news weekly, and television network in the nation. In many instances, we have persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories that could have adversely affected national security interests or jeopardized our sources and methods. And it goes on to then say that they have the same within academic circles.
There's a finding that the Pike Committee made that they had verified 42 full-time Central Intelligence Agency paid employees that were inserted inside the major national news media centers. And most of them ended up being the so-called national security reporters.
The man turned to me, and this is a board member of Time Life, and said, Dr. Greer, we basically are scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king. The fourth estate is dead.
I know reporters for Time magazine who've told me specifically that they've provided the stories and their editors have spiked them.
Yeah, the high-level producers and directors, yeah.
And how were they paid so that it wasn't?
Cash. Yeah, you pay. What you do is you make them sign a form and you tell them, you got to report this to IRS. But whether they do it or not, you're not going to give your form to IRS. I paid, I better not say. Some of them are large.
If you, Ms. McLean, know of any proof about aliens, you can give it to me, and I guarantee you I will get it out. But I am skeptical.
Based upon my experience representing NBC and representing the New York Times, I know that they will refuse to publish information, which in my judgment is clearly important information for the public to know.
The corruption of the media means that you have then undermined democracy and our basic constitutional protections. Because if you control the information flow through the elite media, and the only place you can get this information is through the tabloids where they want it, because it's discredited there, or on the internet where there's so much false information that's mixed in with the real information that you don't know what to make of it, there creates this complete confusion.
When you go to a supermarket checkout and you look at the tabloids, what you may be reading there are actual stories of actual events, but when it's portrayed through the tabloids, it gets discredited.
And they're ridiculed and their careers are destroyed pursuant to a very specific self-conscious official program.
Now this has worked for 50 years. Why would they change it now? This is the technique they've used.
It is time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. I urge immediate congressional action to reduce the dangers from secrecy about unidentified flying objects. CIA Director, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter.
And so we're sort of living in a Truman Show here. Everyone thinks we have a free press. We don't. We have a democratic process where all these sort of sensitive issues would be handled legally. We do not. And that we have an uncorrupted scientific establishment, which we do not, and which we will prove.
The structure of secrecy extends to the scientific and academic arenas, where a deliberate effort to spread disinformation has been going on for decades. From professional debunkers to CIA-funded committees, our trusted academics and scientists have been complicit in the secrecy.
Whatever activity is going on, to the extent that it is a clandestine group, a quasi-government group, a quasi-private group, it is without any type, as far as I can tell, of high-level government oversight. And that is a great concern.
And finally, they need the technology for clean energy. And it exists. And it's being kept secret by the same vested interests who control our destiny. Who are these vested interests, and what are they up to? Well, Senator, you were talking about a military junta. In my opinion, that is true, but I have broadened and deepened the definition to cabal. And the cabal comprises members of the Three Sisters: the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers and the Trilateral Commission, the International Banking Cartel, the Oil Cartel, members of various intelligence organizations, and select members of the military junta, who together have become a shadow government of not only the United States, but of much of the Western world. The Council on Foreign Relations is the oldest of the Three Sisters, and As early as October 1940, years before Germany surrendered to the Allied armies and to vaporize Hitler's vision of empire, the Council's Economic and Financial Group drafted a memorandum outlining a comprehensive policy, quote, to set forth the political, military, territorial, and economic requirements of the United States in its political potential leadership of the non-German world, including the United Kingdom itself, as well as the Western Hemisphere and the Far East. The Council made absolutely no effort to disguise, where's that? Right next page, yeah. The Council made no effort to disguise the fact that the purpose of the Grand Area and later world hegemony was to support an expanding U.S. economy, to provide it with raw materials and markets for its products. This was labeled the national interest, quote unquote. It was equally clear that the national interest was the interest of the ruling elite, whose members comprised the Council. The real interests of the majority of rank-and-file Americans was never a factor in the equation.
Okay, next. So this is just a thumb, pictures of all these guys that we already have come forward. They're there for you to see. They run from NASA folks and all that. It's in the YouTube channel. It's in the archive. Those were done, all these were up to 2001. So we're talking a long time ago, but those exist. It's perhaps a tree that fell in the woods a lot of you didn't know about. Next. And I want to go through this very quickly. This is just a scrolling list of the witness list. Each one of these witnesses has a file where they have either been interviewed or provide intelligence and corresponded with me, and that I have debriefed personally over the last 30 years. So you're going to see this goes on for about 100 named persons, and then it becomes a black list. It just has to be blacked out. Why? I'm not holding anything back except what I've been requested to by people whose confidence I have told them I will keep. So I'm a medical doctor. We understand patient, doctor confidentiality, like an attorney understands that. But until these guys want to be unmasked and come forward, we will not disclose their names, except the redacted list is something available to the media and to the public now. In addition to that, and it's very important, the unredacted list and the full files, including all my correspondence files, are in the unredacted archive. It's about, let's see, isn't it cool that you can put terabytes on something like this? This is all it is, but it's about a terabyte. We have about 8 terabytes of information. We're in the process of scanning it and trying to put it into a searchable database. This has been provided to the intelligence community, as I mentioned, the Pentagon, Congress, and the White House. Anyone who says the U.S. government is not in possession of all the facts and the actual intelligence to get to the bottom of this is a liar or ignorant. They're either a liar or they're ignorant, because that was handed off 3 weeks ago, all of it. So there's actually no excuse now. The only excuse they'd have now is that they're part of a cover-up, in which case they should be prosecuted. And I'm saying even the people in the Aero office and the Pentagon, they either move on this and do it with integrity, or they should be prosecuted.
Let's move into your new documentary, The Lost Century.
Sure.
It's all about advanced technology, how it's been around for over 100 years but kept secret. 0-point energy, a lot of people call free energy, is also called the quantum vacuum. This would basically eliminate the need for fossil fuels, utilities,
wind, solar,
winds. Every means to power that we have now would make it completely obsolete. It would be unlimited, clean, and free energy.
And we've had it for 100 years.
How do we... So let's get into this. How did you discover this stuff?
Well, it was an outgrowth of me looking into the UFO UAP issue. Because once you realize these objects are real, three-dimensional, the very first question, actually, when I go up to Capitol Hill or someplace, I'll put up the footage that the Pentagon said, this is a real 3D object, infrared sensors, no heat, no jets, no rockets, and certainly no nuclear power plant on it, because, I mean, those things are hot, right? Mm-hmm. There have been nuclear-powered aircraft and satellites. But I said, how is that moving at those speeds and then straight up against gravity? This is the alternative energy and propulsion systems. So I always tell people, forget all the mythology and everything. It's an alternative energy system. Now, it's a very advanced one because it also flies. Now, to be really clear, I am not advocating the release of the things that fly yet. Why? It's a missile delivery system. So you don't really want to open source an electrogravitic anti-gravity system that allows terrorists in Mogadishu to get a dirty bomb over downtown D.C. in 2 or 3 seconds, right? No. But the things that would sit at your house, like your heat pump, all right, or in the hood of your car, that would run your car or your factory or your business or your home, those devices that are not things that fly, those are just pulling energy from the fabric of space-time around it. And physicists have estimated that the volume of space in a coffee mug has enough potential energy to boil off all the oceans of the world. Is that much latent energy. So tapping into it to run the entire United States, the whole world, be like taking a thimble of water out of the Great Lakes. So it is what, Tesla called it the infinite energy field. And it began to be discovered, if you look at it, all the way back. But as soon as you step into the reality, the three-dimensional reality of these UAPs and UFOs, you immediately begin talking to people, and this is what happened to me in the early 90s, to people who know the physics of the energy systems, because these things are not using oil, gas, coal, nuclear, what have you. So it's a natural extension of the problem. And I point out to people, one of the central reasons for the secrecy that got out of control under Eisenhower's last 4 years as president was because once they realized how this works, they realized, the big industrialists and financial and global moneyed people, banking, this would be the end of that entire sector of the macroeconomic system. Well, that would have been great if it had been transitioned before I was born in 1955, because look at the world we have now. But it really could have started coming out in the early teens and 20s. If you look at the documentary, The Lost Century, the subcaption is, and how to reclaim it. We talk about how we need to come together as a people and develop these energy generation systems and open source them, meaning that it's no patent, no intellectual property held back at the first level of this, because the patent office will seize it. We prove that in the documentary. We have a national security order on a patent that a scientist I know submitted. We took his name off of it. So the question is, are there some people who can financially put up the funds, and it needs to be a substantial amount, 50 to 100 million to start, to create a high energy physics lab that develops this and gets it out to the public, no intellectual property holdback? Or if there was that much funds available, we could go to some of these scientists who probably have these and say, look, we want to just acquire this. Here's $10 million, now go and relax. Let us move this out to the public. You can't do it. Most of these engineers and scientists and inventors think they're going to do it the way they do a new software program. And they're going to try to monetize it through intellectual property protections and patent. You cannot do that with this, because the system is so completely weaponized and corrupt. And I'm talking from the patent office on. That the only way to do it is to do an open source release of it massively through the internet blockchain. So that's what we're doing. But the technology, if you look at this documentary, you'll see this trajectory. There's a great photograph with Nikola Tesla with this engineer farmer, self-taught guy. I believe it was 1908 or 1902, the caption. And this guy had like an earth battery. He had some metallic stakes and wires in the ground. He was pulling resonant energy. He was running his farm.
Wow.
Even my father, I wasn't alive. He was born in 1916. This was before my dad, who was hand-to-hand combat in World War II with the Japanese amphibious landing unit. But I'm going, what the heck? We have our planet. Half the planet's population doesn't have indoor plumbing. 3 billion people have no way to cook their food. They're cutting down the rainforest. 3 billion. The biosphere, even if you don't think climate change is real, 5 million people die from breathing particulate matter, soot, all over the world from this noxious stuff we keep burning.
Yeah.
So we need to take care of our creation, the earth, and our future. And it isn't going to happen with a windmill and a solar panel. Believe me, no way you're going to run 8 billion people off of those technologies. We're going to have innovative, high-tech solutions to the energy and environmental and poverty problems.
I mean, look, I just want to backtrack on that real quick. When you're talking about people dying from inhaling these particles and these chemicals and shit, I mean, this unfortunately is a touchy subject. The pollution and climate change and all this shit. But what I can attest to that is 100% fact is what you just said, because I've been to these parts of the world.
Yeah,
I've spent over a decade in these parts of the world, and you see all these veterans coming home dying of weird cancers from shit that they breathed in overseas.
Yep.
And I can tell you, in the wintertime in Afghanistan, the soot is so thick in the air that if you go outside we're talking just 5 minutes, and you go back inside and spit in the sink or spit in whatever,
blow your nose,
you're going to spit gray.
Right.
But
those fine particles get into your lungs and then your circulatory and heart and cause a huge number of problems. Not just cancers, but I'm talking heart, lung disease. So why are we doing that when these technologies have existed? Now, this same corrupt organization, because it doesn't just deal with one issue, have been responsible for basically hoovering up, vacuuming up all these technologies for 100 years. I know people personally who have been murdered because they had one. And it's because they, very against my advice, AMA, against medical advice, against their own security interest, they wanted to keep it secret. And they thought they were going to be so clever, and they were going to outfox this big super state of thugs. I'm going, dude, you have no idea what you're up against here. And then they think they're going to do encryption and keep it secret. I'm going, oh my God. You think this group needs to worry about an electromagnetic encryption when they can target a volume of space anywhere and extract anything being said?
I mean,
it's, and it's, I understand it, because if you're in the normal engineering world, you're not going to know this. It's hard to believe it. But I said, if you don't believe it, just wait. You're going to be dead or it'll be confiscated. And you're lucky if all they do is come in and kick your door in, hit you with a national security order, and drag it off. That's your best outcome. That's your best case scenario if you do it the conventional way. So I go, look, it's like, what is that saying attributed to Einstein? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. The reason I can prove that the strategy most people use doesn't work is that we can prove these technologies have been around for over 100 years, and you and I are still tied into a coal-fired or gas-fired power grid, right? So if the strategies, if the conventional business and technology strategies were going to work, they would have worked before you and I were born. So we need to have different thinking about this strategically. So what we're saying is all of these technologies, if they're used for peaceful purposes, would really give us a whole new civilization. Beautiful. Now, the downside is, given what humans are, we like to take any new technological breakthrough and weaponize it. But the truth is, they've already done that. We've already weaponized these things.
How do you think that the anti-gravity technology...
Again, all of this gets into an understanding of physics that unfortunately, we're not teaching our kids the real physics, the science of anything. I mean, we're all locked 100 years. This is the other part of the lost century I talk about, is that it has to do with medical technologies. I mean, as a doctor, I've seen some things that, oh my God, if we had that, the lives that could be saved. Spinal cord regeneration of lost limbs.
You've seen this stuff?
Yeah. At an underground lab on the Mexican-Texas border. Yeah. Sad.
How were you getting access to this?
The people who like what I'm trying to do, that are in the system, take me. And I went to one place, a very funny story, and they had, they had the Marines there. There was all these checkpoints, and the guy said, finally we got to the last one, and this was a facility, I won't say where it was, but I mean basically World War III, for all submarines to be run out of there. And my escort, my military advisor, finally we got to this last point where you go into the inner, it's this huge place, deep, and the guy goes, and what is Dr. Greer here for? And he says, you don't have a need to know. So he played the same need to know thing. So I went in. So beyond full disclosure, I've never worked for the government or a contractor. I have no clearances. I don't want a clearance. But there are people who know that what we're doing, we're fighting the good fight. And the people in the system, a lot of them are very good people. This is what a lot of people need to understand. They got trapped in a system where you get read into more and more of these compartments. Next thing you know, you're in something. And the guys, as I say this, I want to make a call for more whistleblowers watching to come out. There are guys out there watching your show, Delta Force, Navy SEAL, people in the aerospace industry, various military commands that have dealt with or seen this, and they need to come forward because now there's a safe pathway for them to do it. And if you're corporate, now there's a 6-month clock on you. And we let me be very clear. We know who you are and where your assets are. And after those 6 months, you're subject to criminal prosecution, and you'll be lucky if that's all you're subject to. So this is getting very serious right now. That's why I'm on your show.
There's a 6-month window.
Yep.
When does that expire?
From the date this bill is finally signed. I mean, it's out of committee, it's going to be voted, and then it's an amendment to the intelligence bill.
Okay, so it's not actually, we're not wrapped up with that
No,
yet.
it's done. It's pretty much, it's done.
But it's not in effect yet.
I'll have to ask my guy who's shepherding it through.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it is, actually. Look, see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the public has to ask the question very quickly. How do we get the truth out? I think we're asking everyone to write their member of Congress and their 2 senators and the White House as an activist responsibility as a citizen of the United States and refer to the National Press Club event and the Disclosure Project archive, because we've sent all this in, and say, now we need to see action taken. Now, whether the media, the corporate media, I honestly believe is controlled by this same corrupt enterprise.
I mean, Doc, they're definitely controlled. I mean, there's multiple videos of them all reporting the exact same shit. I mean,
right.
It's ridiculous that anybody even watches it anymore.
Well, I mean, it's staged. And the problem with that, they do have, and this is the other big announcement, if there are any attorneys listening, we now have over 150 attorneys and legal professionals on our legal team. And not only will they protect and defend any whistleblowers and the project, but they also we're moving quickly towards issuing a civilian RICO, Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organization lawsuit. Who are going to be in the target? All these corporations and individuals. You can't use a civilian RICO against a government agency, but you can target the individuals and the corporations. That we are going to be doing in concert with this bill, saying now you need to come in and out of the cold, or you'll be criminally. We can't criminally prosecute, but there is a U.S. attorney who's on the team that when we find actionable intelligence and get it introduced into court in a civilian RICO, he would then take it and see if he can pursue it under a criminal statute.
I got another question, and the question is,
great people have come forward in the last few months. Yeah.
You've had, I don't even know how many people, how many different whistleblowers have contacted you guys, and you know, if you're not looking at this with a skeptical eye for anybody, you know, that's listening, you should be.
Yeah, you
How
should.
are you deciphering who the legitimate whistleblowers are from the quacks?
First of all, we asked for them to give evidence of they were, who they were, where they were. We want to see a DD-214, we want to see records, and then we check them out. And there's someone who's in our team who has the ability to check them out through the system.
Okay.
Now, even with that, you know, you could be tricked. The best I can do, now remember, we're not the U.S. government with trillions of dollars or the Pentagon with $700 billion. We're a volunteer organization, best we can do. But the other thing is because I've debriefed legitimate people for 30 years on this, literally over 1,000 people. Not all of them are in the archive because some of them never wanted their names given to me, but they were legit. So what I say is that if the story doesn't track, and and the other is if what they're sharing comports with the evidence from another source, but they don't know each other, there's no collusion. So then you say, okay, this gentleman in 1980 saw this. This guy in 2009 saw this. And it was essentially the same kind of operation, craft, what have you. They don't know each other. But they're very reluctant. They say, you're not going to believe this. This is what they all say. I said, trust me, I'll probably believe it. But then when you get at points of corroboration, so what I try to do is find multiple points of corroboration.
Okay.
Like we had like a dozen people who knew about the ET concerns, about the nuclear issue. So there's a whole area of multiple points of corroboration. And it's particularly useful when it's a similar event or company or facility, base, where they were there at different times and don't know each other. So then you don't have someone being able to match up their stories in some tall tale. So I have my own approach to this.
Okay.
But obviously we don't have at this point. Now the difference is that when we launch this RICO, civilian RICO action, we'll have subpoena power and also discovery. So we can go to these spaces. Now we'll have to find a federal judge who will certify it. We'll see.
I'm glad we went through that because, I mean, it is, you know, it's tough to take somebody's word for things like this. And so
I
think
don't,
it's important
you know,
to...
I do the best I can. Now, we almost were tricked by a guy back in 1997 who was coming to the briefings I set up for Congress back then, off-site at the Westin Hotel in Georgetown. And Edgar Mitchell was there. A bunch of fun people were there. And it turned out he was telling a tall tale. And my military advisor at that time was at a bar, and he started talking about stuff that this guy knew absolutely was false. So I had him escorted off the premises. So, you know, you basically get one bite at the apple with us at telling something that ends up to be nonsense. So that's kind of our policy. But we, you know, because we don't have any kind of significant, our budget for all of this has been volunteers and a few donations and people who are devoted to it. So we can do only what we can do with the assets we have.
Well, you got a lot of assets. I mean, we talked about your crowdfunding capabilities earlier, and those are quite impressive.
Right.
So
yeah, we do the best we can, you know. But I always tell people I'm confident of the ones that we're putting forward, and of the ones we have in the archive, which have not come forward. And listen, anyone listening, you can come forward and only give information to me that you think is useful. If you want to go to the Arrow process and be protected under the new law and give your testimony, we can do that. If you want to come out publicly, we can do that. It's really up to the person to determine if they were in special forces or Lockheed scientists or whatever, how they want to do it. We just want as many people to come forward because there's strength in numbers. But here's the other thing, Sean, we really need. We need to continue to grow the current state-of-the-art knowledge of where facilities are, operations, code numbers, code names, all that. Because that's how the investigators, and if necessary, people who will bite force, if necessary, get these projects under control. That's what they need to have.
Well, all the ways to contact you for the whistleblowers and anybody wanting to get involved or volunteer are linked below.
Great.
And back to, sorry, I'm kind of all over this place here. We're going down a lot of rabbit holes. But
That's
when
fine.
it comes to, back to the 0-point energy and why the government will want to suppress it. I mean, we've talked about, and they're also in your documentaries as well, that, I mean, you're taking, I mean, let's talk about how ExxonMobil, plays into this.
Well, all of the big financial, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, the big oil, petrodollar, all that, is they understand that they want to keep the status quo or tinker around the edges with what I call the pseudo-environmental initiatives, like a Tesla car that you plug in. Well, you have, hundreds of pounds of lithium-ion batteries that are toxic in how they're made and disposed of, charging off a gas and coal-fired grid. People don't think, they think it's free energy. No, you're plugging into a grid that's smokestacks and maybe nuclear if you're lucky. Very little of it is wind and solar. 12%, something. So the problem is it has such a huge impact macroeconomically. But I would correct one thing. It's not the U.S. government doing anything. Like the U.S. government, I would say virtually no one in the Congress and the Pentagon or White House know about those technologies. So they're not suppressing them. But are there people under cover of the authority of government doing it? Yes. And that is the criminal aspect in the government. That is the rogue element in the government. Whether it's the Patent Office or the Department of Justice or anyone. So they're deliberately, I would say the majority of the U.S. government, where you're left, right, center, would like to see a solution to the energy and environmental and poverty problems around the world. But of course, there are a lot of pigs feeding at the trough of the lobbyist money from the impacted industries, because we're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets that are tied up in oil, gas, coal, nuclear, public utilities. I mean, you'd look at the Fortune 500 list of companies globally, not to mention nation states, But, I always point out we've had a 150-year run of that old smokestack technology. These others should have begun to come out 100 years ago and transitioned over. Now we're hitting up a red line, not only geophysically, but geopolitically, where you have half the world in poverty. And let's face it, if everyone in the world where you've been and I've been lived like you and I do, the price of a gallon of gasoline would be $150 a gallon. If they were using the kind of energy that you and I use, and it was all 8 billion souls on Earth. So the only way to solve the human future issue and geopolitical problems is to allow these technologies to begin to be phased in that at least, create energy, even if we hold back the things that fly. I think these electrogravitics need to be held back.
I mean, what I'm trying to do is bring to the light how many corporations would be pissed off if we did hit 0-point energy. The gas industry, the power industry.
Oh, sure.
The car industry.
It's huge.
Everything, everyone.
Well, the car energy would just have to pivot to the type of motor, and an electric motor with a 0-point generator and a little teeny 3-volt battery will start it up. You don't need these lithium-ion ginormous battery banks. Those can be retrofitted. But yes, your public utilities eventually will retire because every home business will have its own energy source. Your big fossil fuel, oil, gas, coal, nuclear power plants, they will all be mothballed. Now, the only thing you'd really need oil for is chemicals, petrochemicals, plastics, things like that. So that is something, though, it's not going to happen instantaneously. As I said earlier, this is like a global Marshall Plan to rebuild the planet and regain this 100 years of lost social evolution for our civilization. But we squandered 100 years. And I don't think we have 100 years left to fix it. I don't think we have 20. So I think that well within your lifetime, and probably mine if I live old enough, certainly my grandchildren, we're going to need to have this established and done, or we're going to be in a true existential crisis. So you have multiple crises coming in at once. You know, the secrecy around UFOs, which is part and parcel keeping secret these technologies, right? And who is that benefiting? A handful of elites, super elites. Now, your average guy working at a utility plant or in an oil field, those are going to need to be supported and retrained to these new high-tech industries dealing with making this whole new system. And I think, you know, we need to be very compassionate about the fact that there will be people displaced.
Well, at the same time, though, everything that we know will be a lot more affordable because it will not take the energy that it takes to produce all these things right now. It'll be, that energy will be free.
That's the biggest component. You think about the energy it goes into digging the raw materials up, manufacturing it, shipping it to a place where it's assembled, shipping it again, and then delivering it to your store or your home, and everything from the delivery vans and jets to the manufacturing process is running on the current energy system. Mm-hmm. So yes, when the energy costs go to zero, after you have a device that's operative, then you're looking at the ability to have extraordinary abundance. And this is the tide that will lift all the boats in the third world and developing world also, by the way. And it's sort of like how they leapfrog from landlines like we used to have, right, to sell, they just bypass the landlines. The rest of the world will be able to go from having nothing in the way of energy generation, 3 billion people have no power energy at all, to having these systems. And suddenly you're going to see so much happen in the world that is going to be a human advancement. And aside from the air and everything becoming pristine and clean, there are going to be such great opportunities for, you know, the dispossessed people of the world, which I think if you don't pay attention to that, this is how you end up in disgruntled segments of the population in the world that later become terrorists or adversaries. So I think looking at this in the largest possible way, you know, it's a win-win for everyone if we take care of the workers that would be displaced. As for the mega giant corporate entities, they just need to pivot to these new technologies and realize that era is over.
Let's talk about some of the ways that they are suppressing these methods of free energy. Black shelving.
Yep, easy. I know guys who have had this happen where they pick it up, you know, they'll get a buyout. Oh, here's $50 million. You know, this Lieutenant Colonel Bearden had a man who had one of these devices back years ago, and the guy didn't have a pot to pee in. And he was very, you know, sort of this inventor, bootstrapping it. Thing was real. It was a real free energy device. And next thing you know, is he's driving around in a Lamborghini and wearing Armani suits. Well, you know, he got basically paid, but he said, yeah, I can't talk about that. It was bought. It was put on the black shelf of a corporation. There it sits. So with enough money, you can pretty much buy out. What's your number? In other words, because if you're protecting a $900 trillion asset base, what is $50 million? Nothing, right? So, and I know many people have had this happen. So that black shelving goes on all the time. The other, of course, and then you get into more nefarious activities.
National security orders.
Yep, NSOs. We have one in the film. It shows the patent office slapping a national security on a patent application of an inventor I know, whose lab I have been in.
Patent seizures, financial entanglements,
yep,
legal entanglements, credible threats, scientific fraud. What do you mean by scientific fraud?
Well, this is where they will deliberately take a device and cause it to be altered so it doesn't work, but they trick people to get money out of them. So in other words, I've actually been a victim of a couple of these. Very clever. But it's basically where you try to siphon off the resources. There's a big venture capital guy I know. He was almost taken last year for $150 million by a group that was going to put it into a fraudulent effort. But so by intercepting that man's interest, they would then, of course, sideline him. So his financial interests were not going to something productive. That it was deliberately being put into a fraudulent sting operation. I've seen a number of these.
Media corporation.
Well, the media, part of the problem is that even if you have one of these devices, is the media going to report on it honestly? Well, it's just like the UFO issue, which is another reason why we need influencers like yourself, but also some of these celebrities that have supported what we're doing. Because my view is that if we had one of these things right here on the table and it worked, and we tested it, reproduced it, had plans for it, the first 30 that we would make would go to some key people in D.C. and some big-time celebrities that have their house running on it. And you'd have 2 billion people find out about it in a matter of days. Because what you have to do is figure that the corrupt influences in the scientific and media community that have kept the UFO issue secret are going to kick in on this. So you have to develop a strategy to work around that. I liken that we need to be sort of water flowing, and if there's a huge boulder in front of us, we flow around it or find a way around. Because there are going to be these obstacles, and there have been. And that's one of the big problems. If the media had done its job on all these issues, notwithstanding their lip service to the environment and climate change, if they had done their investigatory job as the fourth estate and a free press, I wouldn't have had to leave my medical career. So the biggest liability here is with the media.
Wet works.
Well, that's just a term used at the agency for assassinations and targeted killings. It's just a slang, but wet comes from blood, obviously. But yeah, a number of people, one in particular I worked with very closely, was killed. And I think others have been over the years, because they didn't do anything rational. Here's how I'll be honest with you. If you have this kind of information, you're sort of holding a hand grenade in your hand that the pin's been pulled. If it's a legitimate system, because there are all these corrupt interests that'll do everything in their power to keep it from going from your lab out to the public. So I think this is where you have to then have a strategic plan to disclose it open source and then get it out through alternative media and influencers and celebrities. I mean, everyone from Leo DiCaprio to Ariana Grande would be thrilled to have a device like this to save the environment, right? So you use the strengths we have. The strengths we have is that 99% of the population would benefit from this. Most of the people who are highly influential, artists and celebrities, would love to see it. And even the corrupt politicians, once the public demand it, they'll have to do it. They'll have to say, yeah, thank you for your donation, ExxonMobil, but we're still going to have to support this. So a lot of this comes down to the public we the people, stepping in on this. I think it's a huge mistake to think that the government of the United States or a big corporation is going to do this.
Yeah.
The history shows they will not.
Yeah, that's for damn sure. We're running out of time here. I know you got a flight to catch, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to ask you, one of them being MAGIC, the organization that runs covert projects. Can you expound upon that a little bit?
Well, the majority Joint Intelligence Committee. It's a name that's been used. Back in the old days, there was allegedly a group called Majestic 12. That was a group in the Truman era and early Eisenhower era. But it's basically a committee. It's transnational. It's people from different countries that are on the upper end policy group of this whole problem. And there are a number of people who've been involved over the years. Certainly Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, former Vice President Dick Cheney, George H.W. Bush, a number of people, and I've met with some of the others. And they pretty much determine policy on these sort of big global issues. And part of their portfolio would be the UFO issue. Part of it would be all this new energy issue because they're hand in glove, the same thing.
Yeah.
And then there are other problematic agendas.
How many people do you think are involved in this?
Well, I think at the upper level, my understanding is about 200 or 300 folks.
Globally?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, yeah. It's totally global. You know, I tell people it's not international the way we think of the State Department, and it's transnational. So they basically maneuver, and also in other countries. This organization moves with alacrity across all boundaries with these sort of assets, these sort of man-made UFOs, and can do all kinds of operations with they don't need the permission of the host legal government. So this has become a global power. When Senator Inouye said there exists a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's above the law and free from the law itself, right? He was chairman of the committees back then. And then he confirmed to my attorney, when my attorney, Derek Garcia, was a young intern up on Capitol Hill, that in fact he had seen the 2001 Disclosure Project event, said, yep, Senator Inouye said, all that's true, and there is a secret government running all this. So I tell people, don't take my word for it. Listen to this high-ranking senator. There have been a number of people who tried to blow the whistle on this and point people in the right way, and no one followed up on it. And I think we're reaching a point now where I think we're out of time to let this stretch on for another even 2 or 3 years. My understanding is that if within 6 to 12 months, the results of this new bill is not forthcoming. In other words, if these corporations and individuals don't capitulate and provide what they have to the legal U.S. government, then force will be necessary.
Which brings us to the strike team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the strike team?
I'll just say carefully that people who are utterly fed up in the legal government, who have the means to do something beyond a hearing, that are, special operators and what have, absolutely a clock has been set.
Let's talk about...
And the reason for that is they now realize that the organizations doing this are treasonous, and they are subverting the interests and the national security of the United States. And the rogue elements, the worst, are doing all kinds of crimes under cover of Pentagon or under cover of agency, under cover of the government. Excuse me. This is a complete abuse of power. So
is this strike team from the U.S. government?
I don't want to comment beyond that. It would be it'd be an authorized operation against these illegally run rogue elements. Okay, and obviously with full rights to do so. So obviously, and the real question becomes, those guys, anyone involved with that, would need to have enough detailed information about what the adversary has, right? You're going to walk into an ambush otherwise. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we have to do is get as much good, detailed information on methods, assets, where they're located, where the bases are, where the entries are, what technologies that can be deployed as a countermeasure. But we're all hoping this never has to happen, because if the American people listening would actually take action, and the members of Congress and the White House would begin to take this very seriously, all of that could be avoided. And so my hope is that there's a smooth, non-kinetic solution. Let's just put it that way.
Completely unrelated to that.
Yep.
The Hopi prophecy.
Yeah, the Hopis. Well, this is interesting because the time we live in, many people feel, many ancient peoples, and even scriptures, related to the time of sort of the ending of one whole era and the opening of another. And I think that's the truth. I think we're at this point of transition between an old world and a new one. Now, some people say it's the end of the world. I said, no, it's the end of the old world and the opening of a new one. So in the Hopi prophecy, the Hopi prophecy rock, there's one line that terminates, and that's our civilization terminating if we don't get this right. There's another one where then it takes off and it goes off into infinity. So it's like humanity, as I see it, is at this critical juncture where we need to choose whether we're going to go forward and keep going for hundreds of thousands of years and go out into space peacefully, all of it, or we're going to blow the whole system and have a terminal situation. So the Hopis had this in their prophecy.
Who are the Hopis?
There's a Native American tribe in the desert Southwest.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. My grandmother was Cherokee, but I'm familiar with some of these different traditions, and I think that my dad was half Cherokee and half Scottish. Interesting mix, but I think this is why you look at it. Many people around the world get this sense that we're at this inflection point, not just politics and this and what have you, but our whole civilization. And I think these extraterrestrial civilizations know that. They know that we could get into a lot of bad trouble and have things happen that will be extinction level events if we're not careful. On the other hand, they know that if we came together and were, for once in our history, did the right thing peacefully, we could transition to a civilization that literally will be interstellar. Maybe not in my lifetime, but in probably your children's.
Wouldn't that be something?
Yep. Oh, yeah. I have no doubt. We certainly have the means to do it, the technological.
Do you have hope? You think we're going to get there?
Oh, I do. I wouldn't be doing this if I were a pessimist. I mean, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride. I mean, a smooth transition would have been before I was born, when the ETs warned Truman and Eisenhower to make the transition. But I think absolutely we can do it. Is the exercise of free will by humans, individually and collectively. Now, I chose to leave my medical career to do this at great difficulty. But everyone can make their own decision here. Are you going to write to your member of Congress if you're someone involved in these covert projects? Are you going to come forward or not? These are all moral decisions as I see it. Spiritual and moral, ethical. Everyone thinks morality is, the peccadillos of men having affairs. I mean, no. That's what, in the Middle Ages was considered the foibles and silliness of humanity. We're talking real moral choices here. What are you going to do when you find out there's an issue like this, and are you going to step up to the plate to fix it? So it's a moral question, an ethical question for the Congress, the president, all of us, and I think every citizen here and around the world. Because remember, these same projects have assets parallel, not as big, in the United Kingdom, Australia, Brazil, other countries, no question.
I was going to ask that if there were any
Japan.
Foreign, companies that are involved in this.
Oh, many. And this whole committee that deals with it is like a little UN on its own. It's definitely international. I know for a fact.
Man,
it's global.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's global.
And scary, and
well, they are scary, but they're not that many. So here's the thing, is what I tell people. The vast majority of everyone on Earth, the vast majority of everyone in legitimate governments of the Earth would be on the side of what we're advocating if they know the facts, the evidence. So that's what we have to put in front of them and hope people make the right choice. That's all I can do. I'm nobody. I'm a private civilian, retired from medicine. But I do think that if the message resonates and enough people act, it kind of creates this collective conscious wave of change.
How would you like them to act?
I think that the leaders, the public needs to just get involved with this and write to their leaders and point them to the assets that we've handed off, the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. and ask for open hearings. I think the classified hearing process needs to end. We need to go to open hearings. And I know that's what Congressman Burchett and Comer, the chair of the Government Oversight Committee, and I understand the Speaker of the House all think there should be open hearings on this. The risk there is that they all get gaslit, like I was talking about. But this is where the public needs to weigh in and say, don't be fooled by this other disinformation trajectory that's going to be put in front of you. Like last year, the Pentagon released 1,500 pages of material from Dr. Kit Green and others that are involved in these clandestine operations with alien mutilations and abductions and people being burned. And every one of those cases in there, I know for a fact, were done by humans, masquerading as an alien encounter. So the risk of having people at the National Security Council and the Congress being deceived because they have no information is very great. And this is where, as Eisenhower said, only an informed citizenry can avoid our loss of our democracy. He said it. I'm paraphrasing. If you look up that speech, an informed citizenry. So that's why guys like you are, I think, so key to this, is helping to get the information out.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
It's just absolutely not that. But ultimately, if you don't take my word for this and all the data and all the witnesses, why don't we listen to a guy named Ben Rich, head of the Lockheed Skunk Works. And Ben Rich had a friend that wrote to him, John Andrews, and he said, the topic is UFOs. I believe there are lots of UFOs. And I'm also tending to believe that there are two categories, man-made UFOs and extraterrestrial UFOs. And Ben Rich says, yes, I'm a believer in both categories, and I feel everything is possible. Many of our man-made UFOs are unfunded opportunities. So there's funny underlining unfunded opportunities. There are opportunities that could have been used for a lot of great purposes. So this is dated 1986. And, you know, Ben Rich was the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, was a very renowned aerospace figure. And you think, well, people who want, I think, first of all, this is a document, and all this is stuff needs to go right to the Senate Intelligence Committee. We're planning to do a closed briefing for them ahead of the Director of National Intelligence. So if the Director of National Intelligence dumps a bunch of falsehoods onto the Senate Intelligence Committee, they're going to have received all of this and more that you're seeing. We don't have time to go through all of it prior to. This is why this is very important. But I'd like to invite a wonderful gentleman up, Mr. Goodall. He's a renowned aerospace illustrator and researcher. And if you would come up, he has a couple he's a sort of surprise guest here today. And I would welcome you to share your story, that last conversation that probably anyone had with Ben Rich, and also your little quick story you had with the lady who had worked for the National Security Agency.
Sure. I've been an aviation writer and aerospace historian, I think, most of my adult life. I'm 76, so that goes for a long time. But I had somewhere along the line, and it was probably through John Andrews from Testers, that I became a pen pal, if you want to call it that, with Ben Rich. He was Kelly Johnson's right-hand man, and when Kelly Johnson retired, the only person that could really fill his shoes was Ben. And for 25 years, Ben and I spoke. He either called me or I called him once a quarter for 25 years. I could call him at Skunk Works. June, his secretary, would say, just a second, I'll put you into Mr. Rich. He'd be in a conference with a room full of engineers. He'd put me on speakerphone, and we talked for 40 minutes, 45 minutes. But he was dying of esophageal cancer. This is the mid-90s. He'd already retired from Lockheed. And I tracked him down. He was at USC Medical Center. near the end of his life. And we were talking about John Andrews and some other stuff, and we started talking about UFOs. And he said, Jim, we have things out in the desert, and he wasn't referring to Area 51, but said, we have things out in the desert that's 50 years beyond what you, and he was talking directly to me, beyond what you can imagine. And he said, if you've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. I said, Ben, you want to expand upon that? And typical Ben response was no. And he had the nerve to die on me about 10 days later.
No, this is a great one. I like this one because this is also in England, 1990. And this one is great because it has, if you look at the underside, there are the girders and the structures, and they're even weld marks. Now, of course, this is a triangular, and the people under it could see that and could see the light in the center and the three on the end. That is man-made. That is an anti-grav object. And we have many people who have been in the aerospace classified projects who have described these and how they operate. And so we have massive files on these sort of different kinds of triangles. Now, just to make things more complex, because the world is complex, there are extraterrestrial vehicles that are triangular and that are saucer shaped and that are other weird shapes. So to make things complicated here, how are you going to know? Well, you got to be close enough to it to see. And if you can't see the superstructure detail, you're not going to know whether it's extraterrestrial or not. But I'll give you these few hints. The ET ones are not manufactured by digging stuff up and soldering things together and what have you. That's not how they manufacture. They are doing it through a frequency sonic resonance manufacturing that pulls from a template an object in its entirety as a piece from the elementals, let's call it, of space-time, the foundation of energy of space-time. And it comes into 3D, like 3D printing, but for a whole spacecraft, but not putting plastic molding injectors in, but it being brought from the finest foundation of energy, not only the 0 point, but beyond that even trans-dimensionally. So this is trans-dimensional manufacturing. We don't have time to go into this. We'll go into it more this week for everyone. And then this one, again, this is a very interesting one. This is the very famous Phoenix Lights one. Who was here for that? Anybody? I was. So there are a couple events that happened then. And we have had both ET vehicles, then piggybacked on man-made events. And this is really confusing because once there's something that really happens demonstrably, that is a sighting or an event, they will then put up objects and have things occur that are the man-made ones to confuse people. And they'll even do other decoys, so drop flares, all kinds of things. So when I was here in March of 1997, I flew in on an airline, and as I was doing final approach into Sky Harbor Airport, I did the CE5 protocols and asked the ETs to do something that would be very definitive that night or while I was there, because we were at a digital lab that was run by an intelligence group. And we were getting the best photos and videos that we could for the whole planet for the congressional briefings in April of 1997. That's why I was here. And then a few hours later, this whole event happened, Phoenix Lights. And there were a lot of things that were coming out of the South Mountains. Last November, when we were here for the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind premiere, we did a hike up there and came down at sunset, and an object dropped, materialized right over us and went. You saw it. A couple of people who are my friends here were there with me and saw it. So you have both phenomena happening. And this is the problem. People are going to say, it's all man-made, it's all extraterrestrial. No, and we need to get another layer of understanding here. And particularly any important thing that happens, by definition, is going to be inundated with a cover story, and where they're going to deceive people from the real over to the staged, the DDT, let's call it. So these are more of the triangular, and this is a great one. This is 1989 in Belgium, that you can see all the tubes and structures underneath the Belgian cases. So this particular one was very much a man-made one. Again, this is global. Don't think, you have to think, this transnational group that runs these unacknowledged special access projects, clandestine organization, is global. They don't think of international, they're transnational, and have been at least since the 60s. And so here's another one, very interesting. Again, this is from Missouri, a little different from the ones that you can see the girders and the welds on the side. I hope you can see that. That's the camera and the people on the webinar. And these are also well-known platforms. You can basically, once you get your lifter system in place that causes mass cancellation, you can create any kind of air structure around it. And it doesn't matter if it's aerodynamic or not, because the way it moves, let's say, the molecules of air around it. So it's basically moving an electromagnetic field effect. So there's no resistance and there is no sonic boom. That's man-made. We've had it for decades. Is this too much? I'm just trying to run through these. This is to give you just a sense of all the different types and structures that we know have been man-made objects, various different. Some of them are kind of hybrids. They'll have some conventional propulsion as well as electrogravitic, different shapes, and they all have structural, superstructure components that are clearly a man-made machine, not an interstellar vehicle. And this is one of my favorite. I love this one because this one is, this is from Southern Illinois in 2000, and not that long ago. And it's this, like a ranch house with the pen, but it's like how Midwestern. And it's this object, of course, totally non-aerodynamic, silent, floating. You'll hear a transformer buzzing sound often from these. And similar rectangular ones were some years ago, I think it was in the 1990s, were in the Amazon. It was near where there was a E-Systems facility. And these were put up and engaged in, they went from animal mutilations being staged by clandestine human organizations to these were doing human vivisections and killing humans. But of course they wanted everyone to believe the aliens were doing vivisections on people. No, it wasn't. It was our sociopaths in this organization. So, and here's another. This is a great one. This is from 1983, Hudson Valley, very famous cases, many witnesses to these transformer-sounding objects, and underneath, when they were close, you can see superstructure and tubes and other things. That is not extraterrestrial. Now, have there been extraterrestrial vehicles of boomerang and other shapes? Yes. But what do you think to get the idea? And also, how else do you create a false flag? You have to create structures that would be believably not aerodynamic. So, and this is another one. This is another boomerang shape from the Hudson Valley. There's several years of these occurring. You've all heard these cases. And you see underneath the superstructure and the aspects of it. And, you know, these are it looks a little bit like the B-2 Stealth, but this is different. Again, they were silent unless you were close enough you could hear this sort of electronic transformer sort of sound from it. And another one. So I just wanted to run through these. They're all fun. And I want to thank the people who have worked hard to create these, from the reports and the photographs that exist. This one, actually, you could see up in it, the people looked in and they could see other structures and platforms inside under the center of this particular, not an equilateral triangle, but isosceles, is that correct? Yep. So those are the reason I wanted to show you that is sort of to give you a sense of the variety, the type of craft. I don't know if we had any other pictures. I think maybe some of them got dropped, but it's enough to give you a sense of what we have. Now, the archive on this is very large. One of the things, if I had time, I would run through. We can go through very quickly. I think people in the military and in Congress and the American people need to know the difference between the man-made advanced technologies and how they look and the extraterrestrial vehicles. We're going to run through a side-by-side. You can look and see ET, one on the left, seamless. It is actually created in a material science and technology we don't have time to go into, but we understand that, versus the man-made ones that have components, parts, wires, and what have you. Next. And again. Next. And again. And then you hear on the right, that is the Norton Air Force Base 1988 air show, classified. We have a witness who was in there, and these on the right are man-made. They were late Mercury era, 59 through early 60s in their construction, because we had mastered gravity control in October 1954. So these had been in the solar system by the time my uncle, who was Northrop Grumman, had worked on the lunar module out on Long Island to put Neil Armstrong on the moon. Next. This is, again, an ET vehicle. On the left, one with struts, parts, pipes, and often humming, a transmission, sort of transformer sound on the right. Next. And again, one that's extraterrestrial, and a vague copycat that's man-made. Next. And again. And again. Next. Now the one on the right, this is a little bit to unpack. It takes us a couple hours. I'll go through it quickly. You can look up the Cash Landrum case. Back in 1980, outside Houston in Texas. The one on the right is actually an ET craft. It was being, they were unable to figure out how to get its energy system to work. They, I think rather foolishly, put a nuclear energy system on it. It malfunctioned. And as it did so, it radiated innocent people in their vehicle underneath it. It later was escorted by helos to a base west of there. The man who debriefed the 4 human pilots of this and debriefed them, we know, and we have his testimony. He's Air Force Office of Special Investigations out of Kirkland Air Force Base. So the Cash Landrum case involves civilian injuries. They tried to sue the government. The government denied they had any knowledge of it, but the constitutional government of the United States doesn't know this. This is the big problem.